Good afternoon and welcome to the Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, July 2nd. My name is John French. I'm the acting mayor for the month of July, and in that capacity, I will chair today's Committee of the Whole meeting. And in opening up this meeting this afternoon, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Squamish Nation traditional territory, Hot Squalin Quisquamamet, Squamish Away. By the end of the month, I'll have it perfected. Please be advised that this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you've got concerns this afternoon, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting, and that is Carrie Wells. Item number 2 on our agenda is to adopt the agenda, Council. That is moved by Mayor Herford and seconded by Councillor Hamilton. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. And that takes us to item 3, staff reports, temporary use permit number 73, FortisBC Workforce Lodge, and temporary use permit number 74, construction yard. Staff, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. My name is Catherine Mulligan. I'm the Director of Major Projects Industrial. Today I'm joined with Jonas Valeniskis, Senior Director of Community Development, and Sarah Bailey, Director of Engineering, and other members of staff are on hand to answer questions following this presentation. The purpose of today's presentation is to present updated information concerning 2 temporary use permit applications related to the Fortis Eagle Mountain Pipeline project and to receive any feedback from committee as an outcome of this information prior to proceeding with an issuance decision by council. So to provide an overview of the Eagle Mountain Pipeline project, the EGP project is expanding a portion of FortisBC's existing natural gas transmission system. The project involves the construction of a 47-kilometer natural gas pipeline and associated infrastructure. The new pipeline will generally parallel FortisBC's existing pipeline, part of the natural gas transmission system that services Squamish, the resort municipality of Whistler, the Sunshine Coast, and Vancouver Island. The proposed pipeline is to be operated with the existing FortisBC pipeline to increase overall natural gas transmission capacity of FortisBC's transmission system in order to deliver natural gas to Woodfibre LNG for the purpose of liquefied natural gas processing and export. To provide regulatory context associated with the EGP project overall, FortisBC is a public utility regulated by the BC Utilities Commission through the Utilities Commission Act. Regulatory responsibility for oil and gas activities in BC is delegated to the BC Energy Regulator, or BCER for short, through the Energy Resource Activities Act, BC's regulatory framework for all oil and gas activities in the province. Regulatory approvals associated with the EGP project include related BCER project permits viewable on BCER's website related to pipeline and facility construction, an environmental assessment certificate, or EAC, received in 2016 from BC's Environmental Assessment Office, or EAO for short, with subsequent certificate amendment approvals, and Squamish Nation's approval in 2016 as part of its unique environmental assessment process, or Squamish Nation Environmental Assessment Agreement, and subsequent amendment approvals. As part of both EAO and Squamish Nation approvals, FortisBC must meet several conditions at various project stages. The district role as a regulator for EGP is guided by the Local Government Act and Community Charter and its interaction with other acts and regulations, part of BC's oil and gas regulatory framework. Primarily, the district regulatory authority includes the issuance of development-related permits and work permits associated with the construction and development activities for the project. In addition to permit issuance, the district has legislative authority to enter into various agreements to offset associated economic, environmental, and social impacts arising from projects. To support EGP construction activities, FortisBC has applied for 2 TUPs. Temporary Use Permit 73 proposes a temporary workspace accommodation to house project workers and for the project's duration. And Temporary Use Permit 74 proposes a construction workspace to serve as a laydown yard in proximity to the project's activities and a parking area to support temporary workforce accommodation needs. Specific approvals granted by other project regulators related to each TUP application include the project's original EAC, which permitted temporary construction facilities, including a 2-hectare campsite to house 150 to 200 project workers. A subsequent amendment to the EAC granted in late 2023, permitting an increase in camp size to 7 hectares to house up to 600 project workers. Squamish Nation's initial project approval in 2016, which included temporary construction facilities, and a subsequent amendment in 23 allowing for the 7-hectare camp to house up to 600 project workers, and BCR permitting for the use of workspace and to provide a road use permit concerning a proposed access road to the TWA site. The TUP application for the TWA was received December 14th, 2022. Following, the district received an application for the yard on December 20th. Staff first presented the application to council for initial feedback on February 14th of 2023 and again on July 11th, 23. Staff have since been working with the applicant to resolve outstanding feedback. The following slides present information concerning TUP 73 for the proposed temporary workforce accommodation. The proposed TWA is located on a 7-hectare site owned by Lafarge Canada within the district of Squamish. The site is in a cleared forestry cut block and relatively flat terrain covered in shrub and young tree growth. The TWA is to consist of single-story wooden structure complexes with a total gross floor area of approximately 145,800 square feet and is proposed to accommodate 576 beds with the option to add 36 more. The proposal calls for 325 parking stalls and a bus shuttle staging area for about 8 buses for worker transportation purposes. In addition to the main parking area, FortisBC has allocated an additional overflow parking adjacent to the proposed construction yard that is anticipated to have over 350 additional parking stalls available. Based on FortisBC's 6-day work schedule, up to 400 workers would be lodged to the camp at the start of its operations in 2025, with a peak of 600 workers in the summer of 2025. To connect the TWA to existing road network, a new access road is proposed to converge with Powerhouse Springs Road via Crown Land, which surrounds Powerhouse Springs Water Reservoir. The operation of the lodge is prescribed as a regulated activity under BC's Public Health Act, and the lodge would operate according to requirements under the BC Industrial Camp Regulation. Upon opening and occupancy, the primary service provider, ADCO, would manage the full-service lodge operations, which would include the aspects as described on the slide. Access to the TWA would be from Highway 99, the Mamquam FSR, Powerhouse Springs FSR, and the new proposed 1.2-kilometer site access road. To ensure public vehicle access is restricted to both the District of Squamish water wells and infrastructure, as well as Atlantic Power's facility, FortisBC intends to remove the existing gate on Powerhouse Springs Road and install 2 new security access gates. Temporary use permits allow for the use of land on a temporary basis not otherwise permitted in the zoning bylaw. TUPs may be issued for a period of up to 3 years and may be renewed once, subject to council approval or by the general manager if eligible for delegated approval. Conditions under which a temporary use may be allowed are established in the permit, including the site design and layout and length of time the temporary use can occur. Security deposits, site restoration plans, and letters of undertaking may also be required to ensure conditions are met. Objective 31.1A and Policy 31.2B of the district's official community plan set out the criteria for how temporary use permits are reviewed. The table provided on the slide outlines this criteria and associated information from the TWA permit application. The use is confirmed as temporary with anticipated operations from Q2 2025 until the end of construction in 26. The existing land use is resource. The OCP land use designation is future residential neighborhood, intended to be designated as residential neighborhoods in the future as part of a sub-area planning and OCP amendment process. Surrounding land uses include resource, recreational, tourism with institutional and district drinking water infrastructure in proximity to the site. Access to the site is via Mamcom FSR adjacent to the Valley Cliff neighborhood. University Heights is in proximity to the TWA site via walking trail. Potential conflicts include potential traffic impacts generated by project workers, lighting, sound, and dust associated with TWA access in the vicinity of the Valley Cliff neighborhood. As described later in the presentation, the site is situated on groundwater resource Aquifer 398 and presents a potential risk of contamination to groundwater. The TWA site and the temporary access are within an area classified as a disturbed ecosystem due to the forestry cut block. However, the site and temporary access include significant areas of riparian habitat, which are considered environmentally sensitive areas. If approved, several permits are required from VCH related to water and waste and food services. The TUP is proposed for a duration of 3 years with the possibility of renewal if construction is delayed. FortisBC has committed to being responsible for site reclamation, including TWA decommissioning and site remediation. And relevant policies in the OCP include 9.2E, 10.14F, 14.4A, which speak to employer-provided housing for industrial development projects and reducing wildlife interactions. Based on staff's review of application materials available on the district's development showcase, the following summarized items from Table 3 of the report to committee are identified as requiring further assessment and/or mitigation and would either be provided as part of the feedback to the applicant following today's feedback from committee and/or included as conditions part of any draft permit to be considered by council. Emergency management and security plans related to the operations are absent from application materials and are required for review. The site bioinventory requires additional revisions and is recommended to be updated for review. An environmental management plan related to the operations of the TWA is recommended to be provided to the district for review prior to operations. Groundwater testing at the site is recommended to inform appropriate groundwater protection measures. And more information regarding TWA site grading is needed to better understand the scope and risks associated with the soil removal or additions associated with site grading for construction and TWA site decommissioning. A detailed security plan is recommended to be provided to the RCMP prior to TWA operations. Staff recommended that FortisBC provide a finalized TIA based on staff comments to the satisfaction of the district and the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. That staff work with a consultant pending the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure's approval to complete an in-road safety review of the Mamcom FSR and Highway 99 intersection to inform potential mitigations relating to intersection safety via an updated traffic management strategy. And staff also recommend withholding the TUP 73 until the traffic management strategy is updated and approved by the district and other authorities having jurisdiction. Staff recommend that the applicant also prepare a site restoration plan which will be used to inform a security deposit amount to be required as part of this permit. Staff have developed a summary of draft permit conditions for council's feedback, which have been included as part of a council's report as attachment 4 of the council's agenda package. An overview of conditions have been outlined also on the slide. Proposed conditions include prior to issuance conditions, conditions of the permit once issued, and conditions concerning the administration of this permit. Contingency planning. FortisBC staff have verbally advised staff that should TUP 73 for temporary workforce accommodation be unsuccessful, or if a council decision is not made by early September, worker accommodations would consist of a mix of local accommodation and accommodations outside of the district with daily busing to the construction areas. A subsequent letter received by council dated June 21st, 2024 from FortisBC indicates that further planning is underway, including contingency planning discussions with Indigenous nations. While not to be considered as part of council's decision regarding TUP issuance, FortisBC has offered $250,000 in the form of a community benefit to the District of Squamish. Further details concerning community investments made to date by the applicant has been included in council's agenda package. And with that, I can pause to provide time for the committee to discuss and provide feedback before proceeding to TUP application 74.
Council, questions? Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your ongoing work on this. A question about the security related to covering costs of policing and emergency response. Does that include, would that include all forms of policing, like, for example, protest act policing required, so the specialized policing that would be required in the event of any protest action? Or is this only our local RCMP policing costs?
Anything extraordinary outside of our regular policing costs, we have been instructed that the province has a particular team that they would bring in above and beyond what council currently taxes for in terms of RCMP.
And that cost, would it be the responsibility of the province to cover, or would it be the responsibility of the proponent to cover?
I would like to get more accurate information. I'm under the understanding that it's the province that would cover it because it's part of their policing operation, but I can definitely look that up in the interim for accuracy. Yep.
Councillor Anderson, followed by Mayor Herford.
Yes, my question relates to TUP number 73 and under traffic management, the in-service road safety review. It's defined as a detailed engineering study of an existing road facility to diagnose road safety risk factors and to identify mitigation measures to yield a quantifiable safety improvement. My question is, which road facility? What is the scope of this review? Is it a particular stretch of road or intersection, or what in particular would be within the scope of this review?
Thank you for the question. Sarah Bailey, Director of Engineering. For this particular in-service road safety review, we'd be looking solely at the intersection of the Mamquam Forest Service Road and Highway 99.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Mayor Herford.
Thank you. Where to start with this? I think I'll start with a question on the parking. There's it's the report speaks to the parking at the temporary workforce accommodation being used as overflow parking. And I know that the footprint of this proposed facility has really been driven by the single occupancy vehicles. So I wondered if in this planning, is that shrinking the footprint? Is this traffic management that's being proposed here, is that shrinking the footprint of the project, of the proposal because of that capacity that may exist at the laydown yard if this all sort of goes as intended?
Thank you for the question through the chair. The parking intended at the laydown yard is to accommodate the majority of staff or workers, project workers that would be residing at the initial outset of the TWA, should it be constructed and occupied. However, in the summer, occupancy could go up as high as 600, and the Fortis has indicated that they would have a parking space as a requirement underneath the camp regulations for each worker. So it doesn't actually shrink the size of the proposed TWA. What it does is the parking restrictions is to limit the number of, to ensure that the laydown area is fully maximized and used for parking, and shuttles are used between the TWA, until which time it's required that that overflow parking be used.
Okay, thank you. On the topic of restoration plan, do we have goals as a district as far as the new road that's constructed, whether that should stay, whether that should be restored to its original state, or like where are we on what is being considered here as far as restoration, or what ought to be considered in any plan that they bring forward for consideration or approval by the district?
Through the chair, we are still assessing what will be subject to restoration. Obviously, anything that the temporary use permit allows is subject to restoration. The roads, if they're outside of the property, are not necessarily subject to that. Usually what we look for is, making sure that the services that have been installed on the site are removed and the site is returned to generally the same condition as it was. In this case, I think the restoration plan will focus on groundwater protection and making sure that the after the facility is removed, the risks are not present anymore. So I would say it's in-ground services usually, and in this case, groundwater protection.
Okay, so the any new roads or bridges or infrastructure that way wouldn't be considered under this mechanism?
Not typically, although this is a very unique situation where we have a project that is heavily regulated by other jurisdictions. So it's really difficult to give a very concrete answer.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. There are a few pieces here. I kind of had a reoccurring theme where some of the conditions, like the environmental management piece, it says is required to be provided to the district for review. In others, it says approve. And I'm assuming that language is intentional. I just wonder to what level these things that are just for review, what level of scrutiny and what that looks like, and the differentiation between the two, because I know there's likely overlapping jurisdiction on many of these pieces. Can you speak to that language difference?
Thank you, through the chair. Exactly, your comment at the end of the question is that there is overlapping jurisdiction, in particular around environmental matters. And while the district is requesting that the proponent adhere as close as possible to DPA 1 requirements, we would put subject to review as opposed to approval. So the district would be making recommendations on how the applicant can meet the requirements of the district, as opposed to being required, requiring to approve such plans.
One more.
Yeah, one more, and then yep, I'm likely to have more if there's time later. Under the in the staff report surrounding land uses, under tourism, it says that the Squamish Canyon is a significant tourist experience under construction, is in the vicinity of the TWA site. And I think that's a understatement. And I know that a lot of the pieces a lot of the traffic pieces in particular appear to be aiming to mitigate the potential impact to that facility. But this is through the access is through the middle of the site, which I don't think is quite captured in the one sentence, but I won't pick apart that. I'm more concerned about how the detailed management of, if this is to go forward, there's the canyons under construction, the facility would need to be constructed, and including road building and so on, heavy equipment. And then once both are operational, which might happen around the same time, according to some timelines, the specific management of the movements there, I see, like, how is that meant to be captured? I know that that's, again, the driver for a lot of these things around shuttle buses and so on, but how does that level of detail and where get accounted for? Like, where does that live? Is that up to us, or is this something that it doesn't feel quite right, I don't think, to leave it to proponent or each proponent to come to an agreement? Where do we handle that, if not here?
Adjacent land uses, as including tourism commercial, which is what Squamish Canyon is, are definitely legitimate considerations in the temporary use permit process. And I think staff are still assessing whether they're whether this project can mitigate impacts. Obviously, there will be impacts. It's just a matter of determining whether there's been an effort to mitigate them, to what extent, and how great of an impact it will have. I'll turn it over to Kate.
So through the chair, thank you, Mr. Veliniscus. The discussions that had been ongoing between, my understanding, based from the applicant and my understanding of the situation between the canyon and the applicant in terms of discussion is that discussions broke down towards the end of December. And there has not been discussion since concerning mitigations or compensation that between the applicant and Squamish Canyon project. The applicant has suggested mitigations around traffic management, trying to minimize any road closures, trying to move access roads further away from the project. However, the understanding that staff have is that the canyon isn't satisfied at this time with what's been proposed, or the proposal is falling short of the expectations of that tourism entity. So at this time, I don't know if any further discussions have taken place between the applicant and the Squamish Canyon project. The last update I had, which was very recent, was that the last discussion took place at the end of 2023.
Yeah.
Follow up, if
Follow
that's,
up, and then on to
I'll
Councillor Pettingill.
don't worry, I'm cutting myself off after this as well. So, yeah, thank you. I think, so what level of detail would we expect in a temporary use permit to address things like this that seem rather large and need to be resolved? Because to me, exactly what time and who pays for what piece of flagging and where the security gates are, like all these things are there's a lot there I could see to have these two complex construction initiatives underway at the same time, and then those two operations underway at the same time. It's kind of like two different phases. Should we not see these here, or is this to ask for a plan of some sort that would be amended or that would be attached to this? So I'm just trying to figure out where I should expect to see this to be addressed, because I do expect it to be addressed, to be clear.
There are still pieces of information that staff require to make a full assessment of impacts and what mitigations can help address those impacts, including one component would be the in-road safety review for the Mamquam and Highway 99 intersection. In addition, and that would help inform what mitigations would be required, and can also relate back to the Squamish Canyon project. In addition to that, some of the conditions that were proposed in the table that was attached to the report are meant to address some of the traffic concerns. But we would need to have more direction from council in terms of expectations regarding mitigations associated with that project and this one.
Councillor Pettingill, followed by Councillor Greenlaw.
Just looking at page 23 of the report and the non-local workforce chart. When I look at this, there's only about 7 months in 2025 with a higher non-local workforce than what we apparently have now. So to my mind, you could say, this is a proposal to deal with 6 or 7 months above, sort of what we're used to now. Am I misunderstanding something, or has the project been delayed and the in-community workforce is lower, or, what is the sort of, I guess, can you help me understand those numbers? Or are we really just doing all this to deal with that 6 or 7 month burst in 2025?
Thank you for the question. through the chair. We did request an updated chart from Fortis concerning workforce numbers, and we were told that this is reflective of the planned workforce over the duration of the project. That being said, if there's delays that occur, then obviously those numbers would potentially shift. And yes, the lodge is essentially being constructed to address construction through to the end of 2026 with the peak in the summer of 2025. Peak number of workers, sorry.
Okay, so does that, I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around, because it seems like there's a need for 6 months starting in 2025, but a 3-year TUP seems like a huge buffer, plus, they can apply again. I guess, is there a reason, does that speak to the level of uncertainty they have about timelines and so on? Or I'm just wondering why for me, there's a bit of disconnect there.
So there's typically applicants don't specify a timeline associated. They apply for a 3-year TUP, or they apply for a TUP, which can be granted up to 3 years. So it is up to council's discretion in terms of the duration of the permit. They didn't specify 3 years.
Okay, and I'm just wondering, I saw a dry camp, which I missed somehow. My understanding is that's a new condition. I'm just wondering if staff can speak to when the change to dry camp happened, and is that the only sort of recent change in terms of, looking at what's come out of the wood fiber gender and safety plan in terms of what's, community expectations around community safety and addictions and managing those sorts of things? Is that the sort of only change?
Sorry for clarity. I'm not aware of a fully dry camp. I understand that there would be a licensed lounge. I believe there would be, I think, an allotment of up to 2 drinks available for workers. So I'm not sure where that information specifically came from, but the camp itself, as in the accommodation quarters, that's dry, is my understanding. So the only place that workers would be able to enjoy a beverage would be in the licensed lounge,
Okay.
to clarify.
All right. So, I mean, I guess that's one of the things I'm trying to wrap my head around is there seems to be a number of recommendations or outright project changes in wood fiber to deal with what wood fiber has acknowledged are, significant community safety concerns that come with these camps. But I'm not seeing the same sort of plans or provisions with this Fortis camp. Has the proponent provided any sort of plans about how they expect to come up to a similar, set of expectations that wood fiber has set, or have they addressed the disconnect in how they view community safety versus what wood fiber seems to be saying is necessary?
Thanks. Through the committee, through the chair. So the project is required to have a gender cultural safety plan, much like the WLNG project. It's one of the conditions. The gender cultural safety plan is not required until closer to occupancy, so therefore it is in development. Fortis, however, is taking steps right now to engage with district staff as well as other interested parties, local organizations around gender cultural safety, and has initiated mitigations to address the project overall. And those include some of the similar mitigations that WLNG has taken, including providing medical services to all project workers, including mental health services. It also includes training, and that training, I believe, is similar, or if not the same, to the training that's being offered by WLNG around gender cultural safety. They have also Squamish Nation Elder and Residents Program to support cultural awareness. They are working on a orientation package for all workers, or have a orientation package for all workers, and we'll be building additional modules into that, is my understanding, as a result of the gender cultural safety work that will be ensuing. They also have a public phone line with an email and address and website for any community complaints, but they also have one that is being managed should there be any concerns with harassment or other matters. That's being managed by a third party, so a reporting line essentially. Yes, there are several mitigations that they are working on currently. And then as they complete their gender cultural safety plan in preparation for planned operations of or occupancy of the TWA, it's my understanding they will implement additional measures. And that information was included in some of the attachments that were provided within the council report. In particular, there's a letter that's from Fortis from I think a couple of months ago that details out the interim measures while the gender cultural safety plan is being developed.
Is that a follow-up or one more? And then one more, or?
I've got lots more, but you can cut me off, but start with a follow-up.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, I did see all of that, but I guess for those sorts of things, it's not clear that to me that those are different than, or how that's different than what's, happened at the other industrial camps where the impacts to, addictions and sexual violence have continued. And so I'm not clear what the difference is, what the actual changes are, but also again, in terms of gender and safety, the Wood Fiber Gender and Safety Committee, their recommendations and support for a flotel, fundamentally limiting worker access to the community seem to be a key piece, which I don't see here. And I'm not seeing an explanation of why that's not necessary. And then the dry camp versus damp camp is another element where, it seems to be a fundamental difference, which again, out of the wood fiber, their promotions for justification for the flotel, and the committee members, when they spoke at the public hearing about why a flotel was important versus a different sort of housing, again, those were elements which were, it seemed to me, deemed critical, but aren't addressed here. Why those somehow aren't an issue here? Will we get an explanation, or is there an explanation of why that was necessary for wood fiber, but it's not necessary for this work camp?
Thanks through the chair. I can't answer why one was necessary versus the other wasn't, other than to say that the project is following the condition that's set out in the environmental assessment certificate, which specifies the need for a gender cultural safety plan. This is I believe, the second plan that's ever been created under the EAO. And my understanding from EAO staff, as well as the applicant, is that this is a new process, and they don't have a lot of data, basically, to substantiate whether or not the development of such plan actually has a positive impact to mitigate adverse effects relating to projects of this nature. And that will be part of this process. The actual mitigations in terms of what's contained within such plan, or the measures that are being proposed or implemented currently by the project, I can't answer specifically whether or not there's research that says that they work or not work, or how they are different from other measures. However, that is something we can go back and ask the applicant for, and try to understand how these differ from the operations at other camps, if that's council's direction or committee's direction.
More gender related is, okay, one more, and then I want to go to Ms. Glende, because she's got an update for us, going back to Councillor Hamilton's question, and then Councillor Greenlaw, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. And I'm just wondering about our requirements to enable parking. There's a lot of community concern, or I've heard a lot about the amount of potential traffic and vehicle dependence and so on. This is requesting is there a reason we can say, we couldn't say, you know, if you need another yard to store pipe, or, you know, you want some beds for workers, that's fine. But, you know, the level of parking is not acceptable. So we would grant permits with much less parking. And that's what is there a reason why we couldn't do that? And that in theory manages a lot of the potential traffic issues and so on. If, you know, just vehicle parking wasn't provided there.
Through the committee, it's my understanding that parking is a requirement for operation of the camp, and that Fortis requires that there's a parking spot available to every worker. They did explore, I believe, something like 10 other locations to house worker vehicles. However, the district informed them that a TUP would also be required for that parking area. They decided not to go through that process. And I believe, in addition, there was other challenges associated with many of those locations. So that is why at this time parking is proposed both at the Laydown yard and the temporary workforce accommodation site. Staff have talked extensively with Fortis about, you know, provision of services such as a shuttle out of region in a regional shuttle to bring workers from outside of the region to the site, and that is something that they are willing to consider, to put a shuttle in use and try to promote that shuttle and encourage workers to use the shuttle in place of their personal vehicles. However, prohibiting personal vehicles by workers is not something that Fortis can do.
Follow up? Go ahead.
I guess I would like with the, you know, how is this different, or why, you know, wood fiber is able to manage or thinks these things are important and requirements, but Fortis isn't. I guess the parking and vehicle access is another piece to add to that list. I would appreciate following up, because it seems another inconsistency with what wood fiber is sort of said is necessary or possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pettingill, and we'll come back around to you. Ms. Glenday, going back to Councillor Hamilton's question about security costs, go ahead.
Yes, thank you through the chair. I did pull up the letter that I received from the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General, specifically Policing and Security Branch. And last August, they clarified in terms of policing costs that it is a provincial unit that's responsible for facilitating peaceful, lawful, and safe public assembly and addressing unlawful conduct. And then the letter goes on further to indicate that it's provincially funded, not the proponent.
Follow up on this, Mayor Herford?
Yeah, thank you. So that recommended condition around the policing costs are what exactly? How is that established, and how do we ensure that that's appropriate and enforced appropriately?
Thank you for the question. To clarify, there's a couple of conditions that are in the proposed, in the attachment as proposed conditions for the permit that are associated with costs. And those more relate to the planning aspects as opposed to enforcement. So in particular around, you know, emergency management, security planning, it's more about integration of integration of the proposed lodge and laydown, should it be issued, integration of that information into the district's plans and our CMP plans. So it's to ensure that, you know, there's funding there to for staffing time to be able to provide that that work that needs to get done, in particular with emergency management, such as evacuation plans and so on.
Okay, thank you. I found this discussion really helpful, and that nuance certainly did not jump off the page. So I think that should be fleshed out a bit further in future documents. But that's very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks. Through the chair, as I recall in our last conversation about this TUP, there were a number of concerns raised by council around gender safety impact, number of personal vehicles, and liquor licenses on site, among others. And I wanted to ask staff to please clarify if there have been any changes in those regards.
The last time we had a discussion in council, there was yet to be an EAO amended certificate. So the biggest change is the requirement for a gender cultural safety plan, which considers in its development the code of conduct and camp operations and how to mitigate any sort of gender cultural safety impacts associated with camp operations. So that's the most significant change. We haven't heard from the applicant in terms of changes to their policy around the liquor license or other mitigations that you mentioned in your question. Other than there was an update on traffic and parking that was contained in the letter. Sorry.
Sorry. Building on some of Councillor Pettengill's questions, I was just wondering, are we going to get any information around the regulations Fortis will have on site? For instance, any restrictions on personal vehicle usage and off hours? If you know that there will be any, I'm not sure. Enforcement of the 2-drink work policy and how they're going to do that, how they intend to control the flow of people in and out of camp. Will we be getting those pieces of information?
Thank you through the chair. In terms of prohibiting worker movements off duty, that is not something that Fortis is considering doing or within its, I guess its ability. When workers are off work, they are off work, and they will be members of the public like anybody else residing in Squamish, even if it's temporary. They will have use of their personal vehicles. They will be encouraged, however, to use the shuttle transportation. There is a staging area for shuttles from the TWA to the Laydown. By proposing some of the conditions on the TUP, it might help to restrict or prevent workers from parking right at the lodge and essentially ensure some compliance with the use of shuttles. The shuttles, my understanding is they will be provided into the downtown area of Squamish and other key commercial areas of Squamish for use by project workers when off duty, and they'll be regularly scheduled. That information is available. It's in the management or in the management plans with regards to the TWA operations. The lounge use and the liquor license is described in brief. However, there's an entire process. They need to go through a permitting process to allow for that licensed lounge. So they'll need to follow those rules and comply with those.
Okay, thanks. And then will the issues that are reported to the respectful community conduct line become public information or be shared with the district?
My understanding is that they are held in confidence, and that's the point of the line, is that it's a third-party administered line, and to protect the confidence of those calling in. I do believe, however, though, they will be providing general reporting around, the number of calls and when those calls occur. But the details of them likely not. Perhaps at a very high level, they would report those out.
Follow up, one more. And then I'm on the list and we'll go back around.
Okay, thanks. I was very surprised to see that the topics requiring further impact assessment and or mitigation table did not mention my biggest concern, which is the direct correlation between these camps and gender violence, as indicated by the 2019 Murdered and Missing Women, Indigenous Women report. And I'm very much uneasy about this camp being within easy walking distance of our new university campus and its dormitories. In the proposed permit conditions, there's mention that the EAO authorization of the Gender and Cultural Safety Worker Code of Conduct needs to be authorized prior to the issuance of any permit for the TWA from the EAO. But what opportunities will council and the district have to actually give relevant feedback to this? And will it be ready before we're discussing the issuance of the TUP?
The gender cultural safety plan is not part of the land use discussion or decision before council, it would be more focused on the impacts on district services or infrastructure. That being said, the district is part of the process with the EAO in terms of a requirement through its conditions to engage with the district in the development of the gender cultural safety plan and to receive feedback. Fortis has been openly collaborating with staff to, first of all, talk about mitigations that it's already implementing with regards to its project workers that are within the district now. And they are working to set up more discussion around collaboration in the development of the plan. The plan, however, will be developed by a qualified professional, but taking the feedback and consultation of various organizations, including the district. So it's my understanding that staff will continue to work with the applicant on the gender cultural safety plan outside of this process relating to the TUP.
Thanks.
Thank you. I have a few questions and then we'll come back around to Mayor Herford, followed by Councillor Pettingill with some follow-ups. Mike Leclerc, the FortisBC Vice President of Major Projects in LNG, has indicated that building permits for the temporary worker accommodation will be needed by November 15th. And working from the assumption that a temporary use permit is issued for the worker accommodation before the Labor Day weekend, is it feasible for staff to issue the required building permits by that date of November the 15th? And so I'm just looking to determine if November 15th deadline indicated by Fortis is achievable from a staff perspective.
Can't really comment on whether that is feasible. It will depend on the quality of the application that is submitted and our current capacity in terms of what other permits are ahead in line. We do have capacity funding from Fortis that supports review of the project. But again, often it's an iterative process of going back and forth to make sure that it meets our bylaw requirements and the code where it's applicable.
Yeah, go ahead.
And if I may add to that, staff are already in discussion about what the requirements would be. So at least Fortis has an understanding of what those applications requirements would be based on our capacity agreement with Fortis.
Okay, so we've learned that if the worker accommodation temporary use permit isn't issued, a mix of local accommodations and accommodations outside the district would be used. This apparently will mean daily busing to construction areas. A letter received a few days ago from Fortis indicating contingency plans involving First Nations is underway. So my question, does this mean pipeline workers will not be provided living out allowances, which would then pave the way to book hotel rooms, rent homes, live in secondary suites?
It's not my understanding that they wouldn't be provided living out allowances in absence of a temporary workforce accommodation. The conditions wouldn't likely require that they don't provide a live out allowance. So they likely would provide the live out allowance. And my understanding is there would be a mix of workers coming from outside of the region, Lower Mainland predominantly, bused to areas, some increase in the number of workers that are already residing here within the district, and also transport up the Indian Arm for workers that are working on those sections of the pipeline. No further or specific details have been provided other than that at this time by the applicant, and I don't want to misspeak in terms of providing specific numbers, but I was told some increase.
Okay, thank you. And my final question for now, recommended condition is no disposal of wastewater at the district's wastewater treatment facility unless otherwise permitted by the District of Squamish. So I'm curious to know, is this because our current facility can't handle expected volumes due to the current limitations of the facility? And will the upgraded wastewater treatment facility handle the expected project-related volumes once that project is completed, which is hopefully fairly soon?
Thank you for the question. Exactly that. Right now, the wastewater treatment plant can't receive the volumes, but it's more than just simply the capacity of the plant, but it's also the ingress egress of the site. So how the vehicles would be required to move in and out of the site is a consideration. And the traffic that would be generated potentially to and from the wastewater treatment facility at this time. However, staff are working with both applicants and will continue to do so to determine whether or not it's feasible in the future.
Thank you. Mayor Herford.
Thank you. The culture, gender safety impacts, and thus the plan, I think, is a really important piece of this. But I wonder about, makes me think about if we're having the EA is developing this, there's a lot of context pieces here that are extremely challenging. And I find that the mapping provided, which I know is provided from the proponent, often shows this and misrepresents this, whether it's intentionally or not, as being quite removed from the community, way off the side, and it sort of cuts off the neighborhood that's 100 meters away, which is surrounding Cap U. So I know that the context is not lost on our staff here, but this is an area that I think is really critical to understanding. Cap U has had representatives at meetings I've been at on adjacent matters, we'll say, and I've heard them describe their population, their student population, as a vulnerable population, and that's how they approach that. So their participation here, I think, is critical to whether this is appropriate or not. I know it's mentioned that there's no no vehicle access will be provided. Do we have the ability to request that the foot or bike access or something is mitigated in some way, because it's right there?
Staff can take that comment back. It's a tricky one because it is something that it is, like I said, it's a heavily regulated project, and the gender safety plan is something that the Environmental Assessment Office is reviewing and approving. So it's something that we can take back in terms of access to and from the site.
Okay, and I guess it related to that is visitor access to the site or facility or nearby. I know there's lots of places to go where folks seem to enjoy going down by the waterfalls to have a fire and a drink, and it's right there. So I do think that it's actually quite critical how, if this category isn't spoken to, then it's, in my mind, it's a challenging land use. This management piece is just so critical to that. Similarly, in a temporary use permit, is it appropriate to include pieces around the construction or implementation of the use itself? I know these are sort of can be two different things, but we know that the work camp isn't going to fall from the sky. So there's going to be this phase where there's road building, there's actually moving the pieces in and so on. Is that something that can be or should be, is that appropriate to be included in a temporary use permit?
Yeah, again, it depends whether it's something that the district has jurisdiction over. So we don't own any roads out there in this area. It's mostly on Crown land or resource roads. And so we have to have solid rationale why construction phasing should be part of this temporary use permit conditions.
Okay, so, and this is where I think that, I would be curious to know where that is, because I think that, Objective 31.1A is permit temporary uses to provide short-term opportunities when considered appropriate by council without negatively affecting existing businesses or surrounding properties in terms of noise, lighting, parking, traffic, or other impacts. And to me, that's critical, and particularly with the access as proposed, which is directly through the Squamish Canyon site. As to who owns the bridge or the road and all those pieces, I leave it to staff to figure out how we achieve that. But again, the two pieces in this round of questioning are about exactly that on both sides. One I think would be addressed through that EA process around the gender cultural safety plan. But whether that's enough or not, I have a hard time. I don't know how to weigh that into my decision. But this particular piece on the south end access, I think is critical to whether this is an appropriate use. And I suppose the question coming from that is the use, like having a temporary workforce accommodation, and then how that's accessed. To me, these are tied together. They're not separate. There's been talk of other ways to access this site that might eliminate some of these challenges. But do these need to be tied together, or the use is okay, but we need you to find a different access?
Through the chair, the access, the issue with the access in this case is that, none of it is within the district's jurisdiction. We don't have roads out there. The highway is not in our jurisdiction, and neither is the Mount Forest Service Road. So I would say there are constraints around access. And in a normal course, just about anything is subject to council's discretion on a temporary use permit. It's like a mini rezoning. In this case, because there's this other levels of government with jurisdiction, it's quite narrow in terms of our ability to consider things we normally consider. And certainly access is one of them because we don't have any infrastructure. So the impact on district infrastructure, is very limited in this case. And those are the considerations that we have to look at when we're thinking about access. There is a different issue of impact on the tourist commercial, and that is something that staff are still evaluating and have asked the applicants quite a while ago to work together with the Squamish Canyon to see if there's a resolution to its impacts. We are not out there suggesting to the applicants, you should do this or that, and then putting that as a condition. We are relying on the parties to find if there's a way.
Just to add to Mr. Vilaniskis's comments, the road use permit has been granted by the BCER. So that permit is for the use of that for the construction of the pipeline project as a regulated oil and gas activity. So the act essentially is what is the jurisdiction essentially that applies to the road, to the access.
Just before you go, quick time check. It's 3 minutes after 3. We still have a presentation on the Laydown yard. I want time for comments. There's time for questions on Laydown and comments. Go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you for that. So when you say the road, is that there's lots of roads involved in this? I just want to clarify. This is Powerhouse Springs Road down and over the bridge to the start of what would be the new proposed road. Is that what we're talking about in that last statement?
Yes. So at the access to the camp there's a actual road use permit that's been provided by the BCER. Yes.
Thanks, Mayor Herford. Next, I have Councillor Pettingill, followed by Councillor Hamilton.
So going back to that chart, there's an 8-month window or 6 to 8 month window with more folks in the community, not in a camp, or sorry, the non-local workforce. There's an 8-month window, 6 to 8 month window where it's higher than we're already experiencing. I think you said that there isn't the gender and safety planning and so on is in progress. So that means the proponents pushed ahead without this planning and without these mitigations in place. Is that accurate?
The project continues with or without a TWA, essentially. The condition associated with the General Cultural Safety Plan is tied to the TWA. So the requirement is related to the occupancy of the temporary workforce accommodation. The applicant is continuing with the project and introducing mitigations during its planning phase for the General Cultural Safety Plan.
But I think, I guess the point I'm getting at, or just making sure I'm correct in that, the community has expressed, I think we've seen quite strongly concerns about sexual violence and addictions and so on, and the proponent has just pushed ahead and without the camp, without any of these mitigations in place. And, I understand they have sort of the provincial and federal, I guess, ability to do so, but that's what they have done, right? They're not waiting. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. They're continuing with the project.
Okay, and then just, I guess, what gives staff confidence that, given what we've seen with some of the, I will say, I guess, difference of opinion or different direction from the province and interaction on the wood fiber project and concerns the district has raised and the ability for the district to do its what we require in terms of our governance, that if we sort of proceed on good faith that okay, we approve the camp and we assume that significant or sufficient mitigations will be in place for community safety and so on, what gives us confidence that that will actually happen given what we've seen recently in terms of some of the rest of the the broader context? Like, do we have confidence that the province would actually listen to what we have to say in terms of a gender and safety plan? We said this is important, this has to be there. Can we rest assured that they would do it? And it's a bit of a, I think I know what the answer is, but
Staff have been collaborating with the Environmental Assessment Office staff on the development of management plans, as well as with the applicant and the review of such plans. The General Cultural Safety Plan is another plan where there are requirements, and we can, continue to dialogue and work with the EAO and the applicant in ensuring that the district's considerations, concerns, feedback is integrated. All plans are evergreen in nature, meaning that they can be adapted and changed, in particular if new impacts are identified or new mitigations are required. I can't answer as to, the outcome because we don't know yet, but the dialogue with the EAO between staff has been positive, and we will continue that dialogue.
Yeah, one more? Just one more, please.
Yeah, just want to follow up. We had a response about funding for sort of extraordinary RCMP operations, but just in terms of, what the data seems to show about industrial work camps and, increases in sexual violence and addictions and so on, which I would assume is more local general policing to handle. Is that managed as part of the TUP? Is that managed as part of our capacity funding? How does that piece get calculated and managed?
Ms. Glende.
Thank you. Through the chair, that has been managed already through the current financial plan and the future financial plan in terms of forecasting our CMP needs and essentially using taxation to cover that.
Make it quick.
Yeah, so, but not taxation from the utility from Fortis, that would be community taxation is paying for that.
Okay. Councillor Hamilton, and then I'd like to move on to the presentation for the laydown area, please.
Thanks very much. Quick question, I think. In the report, staff said that the security at the amount of a security deposit, they would look towards council for a suggestion or for advice on that. Will staff be bringing forward a suggestion on what things have been considered, or are you looking for council to consider those things and give a a suggestion.
One of the pieces of feedback that are included as part of staff's assessment is a need for more understanding around the restoration plan, and that would form the basis for a security amount. And this would be more in line with land-based temporary use permits as opposed to other applications that council have recently reviewed. And we would request that the applicant provide more details so that we would be able to look at potentially what the costs would be if the district was required to cover them. And that would be the recommendation that staff would come back with for council's consideration.
And site rehabilitation, does that include any potential remediation of any contamination of Aquifer 398? Or is that included in that whole conversation?
Yes, that would consider any sort of remediation that would be required as a result of any potential contamination to the site.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to do one quick scan. Any final burning, gotta ask them questions before we move on to the laydown area, council? Good answer. Yes, we will tie it all together at the end. Ms. Mulligan, are you good to go with the next presentation on the laydown area?
Okay. Following slides present information concerning TUP 74 for the proposed construction laydown yard. TUP 74 proposes a laydown yard to support project construction activities for the EGP project and parking requirements for personal vehicle use by TWA residents. The proposed yard is a triangular area located on private land owned by the Squamish Nation with a planned disturbance of approximately 10.5 acres. It's bounded by the existing FortisBC NPS 10 right-of-way to the south, the existing overhead power line right-of-way, and approved combined FortisBC NPS 24 NPS 10 right-of-way to the north, and with Powerhouse Springs to the east. The site abuts the project's planned permanent right-of-way and lies within temporary working space allotted to the EGP project, part of its EAC, to the northeast of the Valley Cliff neighborhood within the DOS, the District of Squamish. The site is intended to serve as a hub for coordination and support of construction activities, which primarily occur to the east within the Squamish and Indian River valleys, as well as the Hickson Creek Valley. In addition, the yard will serve as a hub for construction activities to the west of the yard location and along Finch Drive and Industrial Way towards the tie-in with the proposed tunnel situated in the BC rail lands. In an additional area also owned by the Squamish Nation of approximately 2.6 acres on the east side of Powerhouse Springs Road is proposed for the development as a parking area for the project's use. Temporary buildings and other structures planned for mobilization and setup in the proposed yard are included in the image on the slide. And I apologize, it's difficult to make out the detail there. Buildings and structures will be modularized and do not require permanent footings or foundations and will include waste and recycling receptacles, temporary single-story set-on-grade module buildings for day-to-day use of project management staff, self-contained sanitary trailer facilities, including washroom facilities for project personnel with onboard fresh water and sewage storage, set-on-grade temporary building design, and fuel storage and pumping facilities in self-contained skid-mounted units complete with double-wall tanks and emergency shutoff provisions. Temporary warehouse facilities included interconnected converted highway trailers and repurposed sea containers for heated and unheated dry storage of project tools and consumables, and additional arched roof shelters. You can see a layout of the proposed yard in the laydown yard access and use report that was attached with council's report package. With the exception of planned connection to the existing above ground power north, with the point of connection assumed along the northeastern corner of the yard site, subject to ongoing discussions between Fortis and the service provider. No other service connections are anticipated at the yard location. Potable water would be trucked in for site use and sewage trucked out. As with TUP 73's assessment objective 31.1A and policy 31.2B of the district's OCP were considered, the table provided on the slide outlines this criteria and associated information from the yard permit application. The proposed yard is planned to be active throughout all the phases of the project. During the off-season, typically winter months, the yard will be shut down and all access points secured to prevent trespass. Parcel is currently zoned RS1 residential. Parcel is currently vacant and no use is occurring at this location. The OCP land use designation for this parcel is resource and recreation and residential neighborhood. The surrounding parcels are zoned for resource, RS1 residential, RM5 multi-unit residential, and P3 park. The surrounding land uses are residential neighborhood, parks, greenway, corridor, and recreation, resource, and recreation. The yard backs onto the Valley Cliff neighborhood, and there is potential impacts related to noise, lighting, and dust, which have been identified. And a temporary construction yard environmental report was commissioned by Fortis and supplied to the District of Squamish. District staff have since determined the yard is exempt from DPA 1 environmental requirements and therefore not reviewable by District of Squamish. As part of both the EAO and the Squamish Nation environmental assessment approval process, several conditions are outlined related to environmentally sensitive areas. The yard is required to obtain a water supply system construction permit, permit to operate, and sewage holding tank permit from VCH. The TUP is proposed for up to 3 years with the possibility of renewal if construction is delayed. And as with TUP 73, OCP objectives 9.2E, 10.14F, and 14.4A speak to employer-provided housing for industrial development projects and reducing wildlife interactions and are relevant to this application. Similar to the information presented as part of staff's assessment of the TUP 73, the following summarized items from Table 6 of the committee's report are identified as requiring further assessment and/or mitigation and would either be provided as part of feedback to the applicant following today's feedback from committee or included as conditions part of any draft permit to be considered by council. And the conditions, the assessment includes considerations relating to emergency management and security planning, traffic management, and site restoration. And all comments and recommendations that you heard as part of TUP 73 are, with the exception of the hydrogeological assessment, are consistent with the material presented as part of TUP 73's consideration. Staff have developed a summary of draft permit conditions for council's feedback, which have been included as part of attachment 5 in council's agenda package. An overview of conditions have been outlined on this slide. And proposed conditions include prior to issuance conditions, conditions of the permit once issued, and conditions concerning the administration of the permit. Fortis have advised staff that should TUP 74 application be unsuccessful, laydown facilities would be expanded at the BC Rail site upon approval by the district for the project's use. Additionally, it is the intention of FortisBC to use the yard for limited activities already authorized by the BCER and Squamish Nation. As part of its application, FortisBC has offered the District of Squamish a community benefit totaling $250,000. Additional details concerning FortisBC's community investments have been included as part of the agenda package for council's consideration. So I'm going to continue this presentation before receiving feedback, if that's okay, just to wrap up the presentation. So I'm just going to summarize implications, related implementation steps, and recommendations in relation to the 2 TUPs under consideration. So if, in terms of budget, if the temporary use permit applications are successful and the worker accommodation project and construction yard proceeds, service agreements, building permit fees would be levied. Legal fees associated with the application would be the responsibility of the applicant. Staff time associated with the TUP processing requirement is funded through capacity funding and TUP fees. And in terms of cross-department collaboration, the Major Projects Industrial Department will continue to advance the application at the direction of council by coordinating with other departments, including engineering, planning, development services, and operational staff. From an engagement perspective, to inform the community per policy, the project was posted to the district's development showcase on the district's website. Additional information has been provided on the district's project page, and a development sign has been posted at the site. Comments have focused on recreational access and public safety. Staff referred both applications to the Squamish Lillooet Regional District. A response was received citing that the SLRD's interests are generally unaffected. Staff also outreached to Squamish Nation staff concerning TUP application 73 for the temporary workforce accommodation to receive feedback. Staff from the Squamish Nation indicated that the nation approved a temporary workforce camp and the 7-hectare expanded size as part of its environmental assessment process, and reviewed related application material as part of that process. Additional staff outreach was completed through email, in-person meetings, and phone conversation. A video concerning the regulatory approval process regarding the temporary workforce accommodation is available via a link as part of committee's agenda package. FortisBC has provided their engagement log to staff and can be found in attachment 6. This log gives a summary of engagement efforts by the proponent from 2019 until now. General comments received from interested parties include concerns regarding potential traffic, noise, dust, interruption to business, and community safety resulting from the proposed laydown and TWA operations. Following the committee of the whole meeting, the applicant would proceed through the stages outlined in Table 7 at Council's discretion and conditional on Council's approval at applicable stages. As per Section 494(1) of the Local Government Act, public notice is required prior to the consideration of TUP 73 and 74. A public hearing, however, is not required under the Local Government Act and is normally at the discretion of Council. Notice requirements are outlined in Section 4942 of the Local Government Act. The application is currently posted on the district's development showcase, where a public feedback mechanism is also available. Electronic feedback options would be included in any public notice published in accordance with Section 4943 of the LGA. All written feedback received from members of the public in advance of consideration of the application would be included in Council's agenda package. Based on feasibility, staff would aim to publish the agenda material related to Council's consideration of this application at least 1 week prior to any meeting date. Given the multi-jurisdictional context associated with permitting of utility projects such as the Fortis EGP project, staff recommend that public input be solicited through written feedback with earlier report publishing dates rather than a public hearing process. And then the following are recommendations to guide feedback and discussion concerning the application. And it's to receive each of the reports and for staff to work essentially with the applicant to resolve any outstanding issues. And with that, I'll close staff's presentation.
Great, thank you. And Council, for the next couple of minutes, I'd like to focus on the laydown area. And then once we get the laydown area specific questions taken care of, we can go more broad. Mayor Herford.
Thank you. In sort of the alternative, if the TUP wasn't deemed appropriate by council and that use was to occur at the BC Rail properties, do we have any way of understanding the impact of that? As far as I'm thinking, I know that traffic impact assessments are incredibly complex and expensive, but the impact would have some impact. We're being told this is a mitigation measure for whatever those impacts might be. As staff, have any way to quantify that, or so we can really understand? Because I think that often this is viewed as just a yes or no to the overall activity, which isn't necessarily the case. I wanted to understand that. I was looking to understand that better. And in some of our previous conversations on this, I think I was trying to articulate that, but I just don't see anything here that really gives me the what I was looking for as far as what the potential impact of that use happening in either of those places.
Maybe I can start with the answer. my colleague, Ms. Bailey, might want to add something if that's okay to the chair. Okay. Thank you for the question. There is an expanded footprint with additional buildings, temporary buildings, which is proposed by FortisBC at the BC Rail Yards, which is undergoing review. Whether or not there would be additional components to that as a result of this laydown yard, if it were not approved. I'm not certain exactly what that would entail. However, as part of any contemplated expanded use, I believe traffic impact assessment and management plans would be required to address potential traffic related issues. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Bailey to comment on.
Sure. Thank you. I'll just add a little bit to that. The TIA already includes some work associated with the BC rail yards, and we're contemplating potential upgrades to Queensway and Industrial and looking at mitigation measures that might be required there. With regards to the intersection at Finch Industrial and Highway 99, that's also part of the TIA, although outside of our jurisdiction. So there's already some elements that are being looked at. With regards to contingency planning, it won't be a huge task to look at any additional impacts to the BC rail yards because it's already being contemplated in the TIA and the traffic management strategy.
Yeah, thank you. I think that some additional context there would be really helpful, given that the choice that we're looking to, a rather binary choice of this or that. And there's a lot of work going into the quantifying of this proposal, but the other option, and this might be a clear winner or otherwise. I don't know what the outcome of that would be, which is what I'm looking for. So I think in the proposed conditions, there's a section around the staff discretion and that the general manager can vary the permit and all these things. Is this part of it standard, or is there anything? It's the same language in both. Just is this something that's always part of in the standard language of our TUPs, or is there anything here that's outside of our standard language? And if so, what and why?
Through the chair, it's not our standard language. Staff have worked with people that have expertise in these matters to make sure that we are, our permanent conditions are structured properly and are within local government jurisdiction in this case. So the short answer is they're not typical conditions that you would see. Not all of them.
Okay, thank you. I wondered about, I guess, dispute resolution and that kind of thing when it steps outside of the normal, which is fine. I understand why this would need to have some like very specific pieces, but just what does that look like in here, and what are triggers? I just feel like there's so much more to each one of these bullet points. I don't want to necessarily drill into any one of them, but just like, what does that look like to trigger something like this, and what sort of processes could be in place?
If I can speak to the intent of the conditions. So the intent of the condition is to allow staff some authority to be able to identify areas of potential non-compliance to permit conditions, but to provide a bit of a process in doing so that it just wasn't a general statement that said, staff can vary. So I was trying to put some scope around the process in which a non-compliant act under the permit issuance could be enforced effectively, and that matters that would be less of a consequence, maybe maybe the project is non-compliant for noise, but it's a one-time occurrence, has never happened before. What is the process for addressing that through enforcement versus a very significant act of noncompliance under the permit. So it's to provide some rigor and some scope around staff's authority. And then the other condition, which relates specifically to the applicant having the ability to request a review by council, is something typically available as a remedy to the applicant should they not accept staff's decision. So I think that's, if that helps answer the question. I will say that these again are a table of potential conditions, and more work would go into those over the coming months in preparation for final consideration of any draft permit.
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you. That's the context that I was looking for here exactly. I think I wondered about these two permits and why they're presented together today. Isn't just that it's the same proponent, it's that they sort of speak to each other and operationally. And I've heard independently what happens if this one doesn't go, then this happens, or the other. If they're not able to solve for council concerns around to achieve a permit on the accommodation side, do we know about what that does to the footprint of this or to the efficacy of the laydown yard, and how we pull that apart?
At this point, we're not aware of what the plan would be if the work camp weren't approved. However, the laydown yard was. I'm not sure whether or not Fortis would want the same amount of parking or the same site setup essentially and operations at that location. It's not clear at this time to staff.
Councillor Hamilton, followed by Councillor Pettingill.
Thanks very much. I'm trying to get an idea of how this type of use would be classified if it were a rezoning. I know it's not a rezoning. I know it's a temporary use, but if this were a rezoning, what type of zone would this be most similar to? A light industrial, a heavy industrial use? Trying to just put perspective in my mind on what we're putting next to a residential use.
Through the chair, it would be most likely similar. It's a mix of industrial activity and employee accommodation. So it's not something that we currently have in our zoning bylaw as a use, because it's a kind of a unique situation. But I think the impacts can be classified as both industrial because of the movement of equipment and traffic, as well as employee accommodation.
Yeah, and I'm just referring to the laydown yard piece of it right now, not the accommodation side. That's okay.
I made a mistake there. Absolutely, this is just industrial. I was thinking of the other application. I got confused. Apologies.
Yeah, these things are tied together, but not tied together. Yeah. And so an industrial use, is there, let's call it an industrial use, is there urban planning guidance, guidelines, expert advice on how far industrial use should be located away from residential use in order for the two uses to be compatible land uses? Because clearly they can't be right next to each other. Is there any guidance from a urban planning expertise?
Through the chair, there isn't any hard and fast rules. It's about the kind of nature of industrial activity. We have examples in the business park where we have industrial use that might be similar to this use, where it's sort of storage of equipment and materials right next to residential use. So it's more about how the impacts are mitigated. In this case, this isn't some kind of production facility that would have emissions associated with it. And so there are provincial regulations that when it comes to regulating certain industrial activities next to residential, when it comes to emission impacts, but this wouldn't be considered one of them. So no, there isn't a hard and fast rule. It's about mitigating impacts.
And the primary impacts to this residential use are things like the noise, the lighting, and the hours of operation, continuous, I assume 7 a.m. to 7, whatever our noise bylaws allow, which is a fairly long period of time. And there was talk in the both the proponent's letter and in the report to council of a $3 million, 370 meter long noise barrier. Can you speak to that, the potential efficacy of that in separating this industrial land use from the impacts on the residential use?
So yes, correct. There is a proposed barrier, as well as, in addition to that, continuous noise monitoring from various points of the site to ensure that noise levels are mitigated upon, and a promise of adaptive management with additional mitigations that are applied should noise levels be unacceptable. In terms of the efficacy of the actual noise barrier, I don't have that answer. I'm not sure if Mr. Villaniskis has experience with noise barriers, or Ms. Bailey, in terms of their efficacy in reducing noise.
Through the chair, no, we don't have a lot of experience with this sort of mechanism. You know, you see these mechanisms next to highways and residential areas, and it is a common practice. So my only comment would be it's a common practice to do so, but I think it will, if this does go ahead, it will be the adaptive management that will be important.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I think, most people understand it doesn't really make sense to be building new fossil fuel infrastructure in a climate crisis, but we're sort of constrained with a sort of tunnel vision for our decision making here, where there's most of these sorts of things we can't consider. So we're focused on very specific things around land use, immediate land use. But I'm struggling, and expanding on Mayor Herford's question, understanding why we would approve this, given the impacts to neighboring uses, tourism and residential. The proponent has said they have a functional site they're already using. The pipe's already there, from what I understand. So what is the reason, even within our narrow sort of decision-making scope, why this would make sense for us as a community?
Through the chair, staff haven't made a recommendation yet. We're still running the assessment. So we can't speculate why council should approve this at this point. We're just not there yet.
Okay, I'm struggling to understand this part too, so I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Council, any other questions on the laydown area? Okay, Mayor Herford, I have one. Oh, actually, you already asked it. So asked and answered. Go ahead with your follow-up.
Thank you. There's a question around the noise mitigation piece. What about what requirements would there be, or other policies that would come into play that maybe don't live in the TUP around the lighting? I know this was a concern. I'm thinking way back actually to the Canyons application, and we talked a lot about the lighting, about what was going to happen if there was an event way out the end of of Powerhouse Springs Road. So what policies would come into play there? And I guess, should it be included in I didn't see anything here in the conditions of permit anyways around the lighting, but is that some other policy that we have just in general practice around dark skies and that kind of thing?
Through the chair, apologies for the delay there. We're just conferring. So we do have, the applicant has submitted a lighting plan, and that forms part of the application. We also have a requirement in our zoning bylaw for industrial properties for lighting not to spill over into residential areas. So it's a bit subjective, but there are regulations and there is a lighting plan.
Okay, and then Councillor Pettingill has a somewhat related question, so go ahead, Mayor Herford.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, does the lighting plan meets those conditions we have elsewhere in our regulations, so it doesn't need to live in a TUP? Is that correct?
Staff can take that feedback from council should a committee want to direct or provide the feedback around consideration of lighting as part of any condition relating to the permit. So
yeah, I was trying to thank you for that. I'm trying to understand whether I need to go there or we have existing regulation that speaks to light not spilling out, and that's generally covered off somewhere else, so that we can. I know this conversation is hard to focus on the particular pieces. I don't want to include duplication or convolute anything that we already have, that we've already regulated in some other fashion. So that's what I'm trying to understand.
Through the chair, so it is regulated. However, staff will take that feedback, and I think that's a very valid concern. It's a impact from one zone to another. We can certainly append that to the temporary use permit.
Councillor Pettingill with a somewhat related question.
Yeah, just the mayor's question struck a chord where my understanding, and maybe it's wrong, but was that the canyon it has fairly significant restrictions on light and sound and hours that sort of goes beyond our normal regulations. And assuming that is true, I think it speaks to some of the values of the area and those things. Now, that's not operating under a temporary use permit, but would we be able to put the same, possibly even more restrictive sorts of considerations in a permit? So, sort of daylight hour activity only, no lighting after 10 p.m., sort of stricter than what we would have in our sort of typical downtown noise and light expectations, but sort of special that area, which along the lines of what I believe is in place for the canyon.
Through the chair, it is very different than the canyon project, and the canyon project itself was different too, because it was on a piece of crown land, so we couldn't register conditions as we would normally with other rezonings. But in this case, it's as you said, we're having to apply tunnel vision because whatever we do in terms of permitting cannot impede other approvals or impede the project essentially. So our conditions have to be reasonable, and they can't impede the projects.
So would that mean then, or put us in a situation where what we've imposed on the canyon is unreasonable, or how do we square those things?
No, because the canyon isn't regulated by the Environmental Assessment Office, right? It's not a project that's approved. Now, this is a project that's been approved by the Environmental Assessment Office, and so our permitting processes cannot essentially negate that approval if we curtail it to a point where the applicants, for instance, can't meet conditions of their senior level approvals. So the two differences is that the canyon project is just within the jurisdiction of the district. The province, signs off on the land tenure, and that's it. Whereas this project is very much regulated to a much larger extent, and our approvals cannot interfere with those regulations.
Okay, I guess I'll leave it there. Just make the comment that I think, as I understand, the provincial approvals are not site specific, and I would be considering, what's appropriate for this specific site as opposed to trying to regulate the project in general. So for me, there's a bit of a distinction there, but I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I have Councillor Greenlaw next at 3:44. We're budgeted for 4 o'clock on this. We could potentially go over. It wouldn't be a huge deal, but I just remind council that that's where we're at for timing. Go ahead, Councillor Greenlaw.
I have a relatively quick one, so. Sorry, if I missed this, but I was just wondering what recourse exists if we do have issues with excessive noise, lighting, etc.
So the other project regulators set sort of the authority essentially and permit the use of the temporary workforce accommodation site and the laydown yard. In particular, around the laydown yard, they would still be able to continue operations. However, if they're falling outside of one of the district's bylaws, perhaps a noise bylaw, the staff would have to look at that relative to the other regulators' authorizations and ensure that it doesn't supersede the authorization given by another regulator. Hopefully that answers the question.
So we would we be fining them, or like depending on the bylaw, if there were fines involved in that kind of thing, would that be what would happen?
Yes, if they're in violation of our noise bylaw, we'd be applying the fines that we can under that that bylaw.
And what is our fine for noise violations?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it's I don't believe it's much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, just at this point thinking, council, are there any questions remaining that are broad, that encompass both laydown and accommodation? Seeing no hands on that. I propose we do a round the table for comments. Oh, okay. You know what, Mayor Herford, but before we do that, let's go to this table you'd like to see.
Sorry, did you have in your last slide, did you have there's a bit of structure as to what you're looking for feedback on? I thought might be helpful to get us over the line for this session.
The recommendation is what I have. Nope.
There you go.
That's what you're looking for?
That's what I was thinking that might give us some structure to get through this next closing phase of the conversation.
Councillor Hamilton, is this a question?
So would you like me to move recommendation number 1 and then in comments we can follow up with feedback, specific feedback?
I think that is an excellent way forward. So,
So I will move point 1 to receive FortisBC construction temporary workforce accommodation temporary use permit for information and provide feedback as will follow in comments.
and that is seconded by you, Councillor Greenlaw? Okay, very good. Councillor Hamilton, would you like to start us off as it is your motion?
Thanks very much. So as has been stated before, this is a very interesting point we're in where we are discussing a temporary use permit as part of a huge project, but we are one piece. And the piece we are concerned with here is land use. Is the land use of the temporary worker accommodation appropriate when considering the surrounding land uses? And when we look at the temporary use permit guidelines within our OCP, to me, the largest one that's in conflict here is its impact on surrounding businesses. The Squamish Canyon, a $20 million investment in a long-term ecotourism business within our community, is under construction right now. Obviously, their construction timeline is going to be significantly affected, shall we say, by the addition of this project, and the opening of that business will be significantly impacted. There will be some significant concerns. And so from the perspective of the impact on a business, I don't see how this is an appropriate land use because we will have the significant amount of traffic going back and forth through a business that relies on a peaceful environment for tourists to enjoy. So that's my primary concern on this temporary use. I'll add to that, and this goes the same as the other TUP 74, that traffic safety on the Mamquam Forest Service Road and Highway 99 intersection is a significant concern. I'm not concerned about the traffic volume per se, but a significant amount of traffic, including personal vehicles, coming on and off an unsignalized intersection is a concern. Thanks.
As you seconded the motion, Councillor Greenlaw, I will look to you. Come back around? Okay, Mayor Herford.
Thank you. I think for me, the access to we already talked about little things around like fleshing out what we mean by policing costs and, you know, some of those little pieces, which could be quite major, but I think we have some understanding of where where those things lie. For me, the access to the site is critical. And it's not limited to strictly to traffic and mitigating the personal vehicle use, that kind of thing. That the aim of those things is to, in my opinion, mitigate the potential impacts to the adjacent uses, which in this case is the canyon. So I think that if this is to get to a supportable point, it needs a very detailed plan on how to manage specific activities and movements, not just while the lodge is operational, but under construction as well. These are two big projects happening at the same time, and I think some specific management of that is critical to actually making this supportable. So, and that goes beyond just how many vehicle trips a day at build out. It goes right into, times a day and appropriate use and machinery movements likely, and competing for maybe the same space on a bridge to lift something into place. I don't know what those are, but it needs to be, to me, this is a big piece of work that just still feels like a blind spot, besides having some consultation in a table that it happened, but we haven't got back to it. That this is critical to accessing the site. Similarly, CAPU's involvement and the gender cultural safety work. I don't know how we untangle this from a jurisdictional perspective, but the context there is something that exists likely more around this table than maybe even CAPU as they're discovering where they are in space and time. I don't know if they've walked over there. I don't know if they know where Carpenter Sons Bridge is. They have enough things inside their scope. So I think it's our collective job and staff's, as they engage with the EA, to make sure that the context is apparent. I don't think the mapping provided aims to do that. So I think that we have some responsibility there to make sure that context actually comes across. I found some of the graphics challenging and not quite. Maps are very powerful tools, and that's one way, but I also think that, but I know that staff understands, but getting making sure that those management plans, in this case, likely the gender culture safety plan, maybe something else, really addresses that proximity to the post-secondary education, which is a really challenging land use piece. I think I was wondering about a lot of this, the permit talks about measuring. So measuring the reporting on parking restriction protocol to ensure compliance and movements, but it doesn't really, I know it's aiming to reduce impacts or mitigate impacts, but I think some metrics for success there. Like, I don't know what a high number is. I don't know what a low number is. We're measuring and reporting, but I don't know. I feel like there could be some teeth that could be fleshed out a bit more. I'm open to hearing what appropriate level is from from staff on this. And I think the goal is, in general, is understood, but I don't know if we know what success or failure looks like in this particular way. And I think I actually quite like I was happy to see the inclusion of the prohibition of TWA residents from parking at the location. I do think that like many of these regulations need to have, something put around them as far as reporting out, or should there be exceptions? Maybe the elder in residence could be one exception. Like, what are those exceptions? Should there be any? What's the reporting? That kind of thing, I think is, but in general, I'm supportive of that. But like many things, prohibition rarely works in almost anything. So I just wonder what that looks like as far as fleshing out that nuance of that further. But the biggest issue for me at this point is really the adjacent land uses and how that's affected by access. It's vehicle access, and on the south and at the north, it's the 100-meter walk to the post-secondary education that is challenging, and that comes into that gender cultural safety plan and all the rest. So those are the sort of the two big categories for me, and look forward to seeing what comes of that. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was very generous on your time there. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. And most of my comments will apply for both. I may have one or two for the second one, but so maybe if I go a bit long, try not to. I guess, I think if this were to proceed, I think all of the staff considerations should be included. And some of those I understand need some more fleshing out. Personally, I think this would need to go to a public hearing. I think the level of public interest and concern is so high that the public needs to be included. And I think some of the challenges we faced around the process was not because we had a public hearing, it's because we went too quickly and council and the community didn't see a certificate before we got to the public hearing. And so I think from my perspective, there's a fair bit of work to do. And so I'd want to see this come back to at least one more committee of the whole before we proceeded anywhere. I do think there's a lot of work to be done, especially in the context of the Wood Fiber Gender and Safety Committee and its recommendations and Wood Fiber's justifications for their camp. This proposal seems completely contradictory to what Wood Fiber said and the community members have said is necessary for community protection. And I know we don't normally directly manage community safety and stuff like that, but through the form and where we locate different uses, that's how we manage that. And we're being asked to vary our normal forms and uses to accept something. And so I think for me, that's when I would expect other mitigations, like not just plans, but plans that we actually have some say in and so on. If we can't have that say, if we can't manage those conditions, I think we have to fall back on where we do have the ability to do what we can for community safety, which is form and where the uses go. I think it's, as some of my colleagues have spoken to, this use does not seem appropriate given the proximity to the residential, to the university. The amount of personal vehicle access doesn't make sense. So I wouldn't, I think Wood Fiber has clearly shown how you can have a camp without access to personal vehicles, without access to community. And I think there's a bit of a challenge there in terms of worker access to community. There isn't the community benefit in terms of business, but if that's your only mechanism or your primary mechanism to manage community safety and protect the community from addictions issues and so on, then it becomes a really something that may be important as a trade-off. And I haven't seen an argument or justification of why we can ignore what the Gender and Safety Committee has said is really important. I guess, again, like pointing to that chart, there's a small 6 to 8 month window where this is maybe providing a benefit to the community beyond the current state. And so I'm just struggling to understand really why we would accept the many negative pieces to this temporary use permit and the risks. I think for me, the risk to water is a big concern. I'm not willing to tolerate a lot of risk. If we're going to move ahead with this camp, I know it's been suggested that paving might provide some protection, but I'm not sold on the idea that paving a huge greenfield area would actually be beneficial to the environment. So I'd need a fair bit more understanding there. Yeah, so again, I think there's a lot more work for the proponent to do and to really explain, I think people misunderstand. When we talk about cumulative impacts, we're not talking about, it would be nice, but we're not talking about upstream fracking and full life cycle carbon emissions and so on. I wish we could actually focus on the, existential challenges. But even within this project, like how does these completely different approaches and contradictory approaches to worker housing, how do they work together? And this doesn't speak to that. And we've had sort of two arguing proposals from effectively the same project. And I think, some sort of understanding of how this all fits together and what the impacts are of taking these contradictory approaches. And again, I question, I wish the proponent was listening, but when I compare this to what I see, what's coming out of the Wood Fiber Gender Safety Committee, which Fortis is supposed to be participating in, again, this is contradictory to it. So I guess I'm looking for that, some signs that the proponent gets it, that it's listening to the community, that's actually addressing community concerns, and that this discretionary permit, it makes sense because it's really fundamentally addressing things we're concerned about. And I'm just not seeing that. And so I think I would want to see that the next time this comes back to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I will not be in favor of a public hearing in line with the recommendation we've heard from staff. I will hope for good, clear communications to address the challenges that Mr. Valeniskas has outlined. The challenges on one side, the submissions have to meet a quality standard for us to be efficiently working through them. And of course, we have our staff capacity constraints, but we're going to depend on good communications between the applicant and ourselves on this. I'd like to focus on the Highway 99 intersection with Macklin Forest Service Road and Site B on the west side. This intersection has been addressed now in connection with 3 projects: Squamish Canyon about 3 years ago, with Wood Fiber LNG recently, and now with FortisBC. We have learned today that the in-service road safety review will be focused on this intersection. To quote the staff report, staff are concerned about the addition of more vehicles to the intersection under current conditions. I would like to emphasize that we need to be sure to take an integrated view at this intersection and its issues and its users, and that we not only look at cumulative impacts, but collaboration in resolving these issues. The Sea to Sky gondola and its southbound exit traffic is part of the intersection's issues. People doing U-turns and often lacking in orientation about that highway intersection as they make their way south from the gondola. The highway speed is an issue, and it has not been addressed by signage, which is the only real thing that the MOTI have done for this intersection, is install signage. It's not been effective. Highway speed is one of our solutions for all of us. And also, we have to address the physical constraints that from the bridge on the north side and involving the bridge to the other side of the intersection, there are real physical constraints for introducing mitigation measures or changes to the intersection to address our issues. In the end, they stem from the highway upgrade that was completed before the Olympics, just didn't foresee some of the issues that have come forward. When we addressed the the Squamish Canyon project, there were proposals to address some of these intersection issues. We had to point out with staff and with the consultant, Bunton Associates, that some of those solutions were going to affect this picture on the other side. So in summary, we need an integrated view of this intersection, all of its users, and we have to look forward to not only assessing cumulative impacts, but collaborative advocacy vis-a-vis MOTI. We need to have all of our stakeholders, including the gondola, at the table to finally make some headway on the safety issues in this intersection, present and future. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson and Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks. Through the chair, I think the staff recommendations for permit conditions should be addressed by the proponent. I would also be in favor of a public hearing. I think the public is very concerned about this proposal, and they deserve an opportunity to at least express their concerns, regardless of what the province chooses to do with that information. I am deeply concerned about the location of the workforce accommodations, and I am still concerned about the liquor license in conjunction with the gender violence and personal vehicles. I think this poses a significant danger to our community, and to juxtapose this proposal to the WLNG mitigations to address our community safety issues is quite a stark comparison. I personally will not be comfortable approving any TUP without significantly more assurances that the women in our community will be safe, in particular our Indigenous women and our university and Coast Mountain students. In terms of the vehicle traffic piece, we know that one of the Fortis contractors has already caused a serious injury on Highway 99, resulting in life-altering injuries to 2 members of our community. And so I welcome both an improved traffic study and greater accountability on Fortis's behalf for the behavior of their contractors. I would like to have more information on how they intend to monitor flow of people into and out of these camps, as it is my understanding that these camps are now being associated with human trafficking of young women. I would also like more information regarding how they intend to police the 2 drinks per day worker policy, or sorry, 2 drinks per worker policy per day. I will repeat once again that I have worked in camps like this, though mine were generally smaller and alcohol always introduced trouble. I am also concerned about the impacts on the Squamish Canyon project and strongly encourage the proponent to work with Squamish Canyon to reduce its impacts on this local business. I'm also deeply concerned with the risk to our aquifer as well. I know we feel quite water secure in this area, but with climate change bringing erratic weather that is actively melting our glaciers, which is the source of our drinking water, I am, to put it mildly, hesitant to put an aquifer at risk of contamination. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Herford.
Sorry, I just wanted to suggest that we have a discussion specifically about the recommendation around public hearing and how that's handled, just separate from this, just to keep us moving through. And then maybe it's the missing bullet point 5.
I will manage that conversation once we've gotten through these motions. I don't have anything to add that staff hasn't already heard around the table. So at this point, I'd like to call the question on the motion that is on the floor to receive the FortisBC Construction Temporary Workforce Accommodation Temporary Use Permit Report for information and provide the feedback that we've just heard at this table. All those in favor? That's a unanimous approval. And then, so the next step in this motion is to direct staff to work with FortisBC to resolve any identified issues prior to consideration of the temporary use permit. That's moved by Mayor Herford, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. And you want to speak to it?
I'd like to propose an amendment.
Go ahead.
The district staff work with FortisBC to resolve any identified issues prior to consideration of the temporary use permit number 73 on or before the 10th of September 2024.
Can I get a seconder for the amendment? Councillor, I don't see a seconder for the amendment. Would anybody like to speak on the main motion or the motion?
I'll speak to the motion and perhaps lead a little bit into why I proposed the amendment I did. I think it's extremely important we continue to work with FortisBC to get to hopeful resolution of a potentially acceptable temporary use permit. I also hear FortisBC loud and clear that a decision needs to be made before, they said early September, I believe. And I do think that it's valuable for this to come to council before that time so that council can make this decision. I recognize staff is in a position that they need to make sure we collect all the information before bringing it to council. But I also think it's important to bring this before council on timelines that work for FortisBC, independent of whether it's supportable or not by council.
Mayor Herford.
Thank you. In general, I just want to speak briefly to the timeline there. I think that we clearly have a proponent that has been expressing urgency in this decision, and the outstanding issues. The speed that we can move depends on the speed that we get answers. I also think that I do think it's really important that the decision of this does lay with council and not with a running down of the clock, as far as it no longer being viable and the decision being made for us one way or the other. So it was not in any way not a sharing of your concerns for time, but just the practical constraints. I'm resistant to putting specific dates to most things that involve such high level of detail. So,
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I will support this. We do have capacity funding. I hope the proponent will take heed to some of the comments, because I think they have a long way to go, and maybe this doesn't make sense. I think the proponents clearly identified they have alternate approaches, that they don't need these TUPs. And so they can make the decide whether or not it's worth the effort. I will note that despite capacity funding, there are still choke points at senior staff and council. And this is, again, despite the capacity funding taking up an enormous amount of staff resources and focus, and community resource and focus away from our priorities as a community, I still have concerns about that. And I hear from other people trying to work on other projects, and I don't think we've got that balance right. And so I don't want to slow roll anything or be slow, but all projects, because there's such demand, we're such a quickly growing community, there's so much demand on our staff and our council to do everything. And so things take a while, and Fortis and Woodfibre don't get to go to the front of the line. Neither does anyone else. Everyone will go. I know our staff are just killing themselves trying to get everything on their plates done. And we see big council agendas with heavy topics, and we'll continue to work through the best we can. But that doesn't mean we should rush things, play favorites, or do things improperly. I think we have expressed many times engagement on this project. These projects have been poor, and I'm certainly not seeing alignment with community expectations on this. And so I don't think you can reasonably expect a quick approval when you're so far disconnected with what the community says it feels and wants. And the closer you can get to actually addressing community concerns, I think things just with any project start to move faster. And so I think actually the timeline has been and continues to be largely the responsibility of the proponent here. And so I think if the proponent wants to see it move faster, they should find a way to align more with what the community says it needs and wants. And I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no more hands, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Staff, I'm just going to turn to you on the workforce accommodation. Do you want or need any clarification out of what you've heard out of that motion?
Staff's clear on the feedback. Thank you.
Excellent. I'll move now to the construction laydown yard temporary use permit. Council, knowing that we're going to have a separate conversation after we're done with this specific to public hearing, and your thoughts on that. So Councillor Hamilton moves that we receive the FortisBC construction laydown yard temporary use permit report for information and provide the feedback that you're about to hear. Seconder? Seconded by Mayor Herford. Councillor Hamilton, we'll start with you.
Thanks very much. On the construction laydown yard, my primary concern regarding this temporary use permit as pertained to land use is its proximity to residential. I think the land use, if I'm correct, I should have clarified this, is within 50 or 60 meters of residential use, and putting an industrial use in such close proximity to residential use is something I would certainly not consider for a rezoning. And I think that considering we have zones within the district that are usable and identified by the proponent as usable for this use, I don't see an industrial use being in such proximity to residential use as being a suitable land use in this case.
Mayor Herford, you're second on this one. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to understand the community impact for the alternative. So just what the impact of that would be, because I'm having a hard time parsing apart the options that's being presented to us. I would like to see quite restrictive lighting plan for this, so some commitments there. I like the concept of the screening, the buffering for the folks in, is it Ravens Plateau there? But I also think the Powerhouse Springs Road interface needs to really be well thought out. This is actually an incredibly busy area today. And as Squamish Canyon builds out, this is also a gateway into that area, and I see that as an adjacent land use. So I do think that this is an important piece. This is wherever this facility lands in the community is really the face of the stationary face of the static face of Fortis in the community and the project. So I do think it's quite important to make this to see if this can be made appealing in that way. The rest of the concerns I think are fairly well captured in the proposed conditions, but whether the resulting plans go far enough remains to be seen for me. But that's what it for me. Thank you.
Councillor Greenlaw.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo the comments of my last two colleagues.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I think I will pile on, but just say I'm still looking beyond just traffic to understand the why of this, given that the proponent says they have a completely viable alternative. And for me, things like $3 million on a wall to maybe cut down on noise a little bit, it just doesn't seem like a good use of money. So I'd need a lot more understanding of why that was actually worthwhile. And I think for me, I understand that we can't require it. Maybe the proponent would like to offer something in terms of, their project plan or whatever, how to address some of the concerns. But I'm having trouble wrapping my head around this, especially when I don't understand why we would do it, to give a permit that has much less restrictive conditions than what something like Squamish Canyon is expected to uphold. Again, I understand that we can't sort of proactively mandate some of these things, but then it doesn't seem like a permit without those things can be supportable. So I'm not sure how we connect those two things. And so I guess that's for the proponent to sort out if they wish to proceed. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Herford, one more.
Sorry, I forgot. If possible, I'd like to explore if it's possible to just explicitly say that any noise exemption would not be supported for consideration on the site. So that what we're contemplating at temporary use is what we're contemplating, not, oh, you have a facility here and then now there's an additional ask for a noise exemption for outside of that our regulations may compel us to issue that's not issued. So I want to make sure that piece is, if possible, I don't know if we can do what I'm proposing here, but I'd like to understand if that's possible, and it seems like that would be appropriate given the residential use adjacent.
Thank you, Mayor Herford. And my only thought to share before I call the question is to thank staff for what I believe is thorough and detailed work on both of these items, the laydown and the workforce accommodation. It's a challenging topic with a lot of tentacles. And over the course of this past weekend, reading through the materials, it's clear to me that a lot of good work went into it. So with that, I will call the question on this motion. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimous. And then just to tie this up is a motion to direct staff to work with FortisBC to resolve any identified issues prior to consideration of the temporary use permit. That is moved by Mayor Herford and seconded by Councillor Anderson. Is there any discussion on this one, Council? Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I just had some hesitation with this and actually Councillor Hamilton's earlier resolution, which or amendment, which didn't quite pass. And there is a piece of me that sees this as so far away. Maybe it's time to stop burning staff resources, but we do have capacity funding and I don't want to be the one to sort of presume without all the information that there isn't another solution. So if the proponent wants to keep, proposing alternatives or figure out a way to address council concerns, I'm okay to leave that door open. I would suggest to staff, though, if we do find we're spinning our wheels and not getting anywhere, there maybe is a point where we have to say it's time to move on and to maybe make sure that gets flagged up for council. But for now, I'm supportive of proceeding on this path.
Anyone else before I call the question? All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. And staff, as I did on the previous, I will just do a quick check-in. Is there anything you want or need in the way of clarification or additional questions of council?
Nothing specific to this one. We do want to hear from council because there's been a few comments made about the public hearing. So we want to make sure that we get that feedback from council.
Okay, great. So I think I heard relatively clearly from Councillor Anderson and Councillor Greenlaw in their comments. I'll just go around the table. I'll start with Councillor Hamilton and make my way this way. Go ahead.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're not quite in a motion. Yeah, okay. So the question is, are there any public input mechanisms that are available to us to hear orally from the public that are not public hearings?
Through the chair, yes. So usually an applicant on a bigger application has to hold a public information meeting, which I believe has been done here. Sometimes if there's a lot of evolution in the application, we ask the applicants to hold another public information meeting to present the new information to the public. So that's really the only other venue for, but it's really more about questions and answering. It's not about oral submissions for council. The reason why staff recommend not holding a public hearing is because of this narrow jurisdictional application that we have and the likelihood that we will be able to respond to the majority of public's concerns. We still will collect submissions in writing if there is no public hearing. And the other consideration maybe that council should consider is if staff are not done the analysis yet, if we finish our analysis and we are not recommending in a scenario where staff cannot recommend approval of the project, technically we are not, the local governments are not required to collect feedback in that case. So if it's only when council is planning to approve something that for temporary use permit, we need to collect feedback. So there's that nuance as well for council's consideration.
Mayor Herford.
Yeah, thank you. I guess questions on this is it feels to that point that you just made, it feels early for a decision on this. So just where do you see the timeline? Like I don't know. I know the bullet points that we just okayed, but I don't necessarily know how much of a lift it is on either side to address those. So if this is destined to come back to us before decision, or Are you thinking that at this point it would come back? Staff's proposal would be that it comes back at a regular, a special, or whatever is appropriate is the next step for a decision. Is that your next step with this in this scenario?
That's based on council's feedback. Based on the assessment that staff has completed, staff's plan was to return at the point of an issuance decision and try to provide material earlier than what typically gets published in the agenda for more time for public review and council's review, and also the ability for the public to make submissions concerning the materials that are presented for consideration.
Thank you. Is there an obligation to treat both of these the same way?
There's no obligation. They're two separate applications, essentially. We've batched them together, considering that there is some interdependency on each application, and it's the same applicant submitted around the same time. So, but they are considered two separate TUP applications.
Okay, thank you. Actually, no, I'm going to leave it. I'll leave it there for now. I remember what it was. Can we you mentioned a public information meeting, and I think that part of the reason that the original decision was made in the Flotel discussion to go to public hearing was really to fill a void on public engagement. And I wondered if between here and wherever we would consider issuance, if we weren't going to do a public hearing, and I understand the complexity and the reason that having that focused engagement, that does make some sense, and a public hearing might not be the best public engagement tool. It's an incredibly awkward one in my opinion. However, can we compel the proponent to have an additional public information meeting given that the public engagement I still feel has been lacking? Is that something that we can do or be appropriate in this as part of this discussion?
Through the chair, we can take that back. I can't conclusively say that we can compel an applicant to do so, especially when they've already done one. So I would say the staff can take that back. We do need council's decision on whether if we are going to hold a public hearing, I think at this point, because it takes a lot to organize one. But staff will take that back for the public information meeting. It's not going to be quite the same as a public hearing.
Okay, I'm noting it's 4:27. We're really cutting into dinner break time. Councillor Pettingill, is it on what we just heard? Go ahead, and then Mayor Herford after that.
Yeah, so two things. Public information meeting held by the proponent, that would mean the proponent is the moderator. It's not on official public record or anything. It's just the proponent, however they choose to do it. Is that correct? And the proponent moderating?
It's a little bit flexible in terms of they happen in all sorts of ways. Public information meetings, sometimes staff are more involved than the proponent, depending on what the matter is. The feedback from that meeting gets collected by staff in written form. So we usually are there with a box and comment sheets, and people submit it in following the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the ones I've been at, I guess I feel it's important that whatever happens next, if this is to go for public input, should be district moderated or facilitated rather than proponent. But setting aside, do we actually need to make this decision today? Again, from my end, from what I heard today, there's a lot to work on. I think there's at least one committee of the whole between before we go to whatever happens next, public information meeting, or just we've had enough, or public hearing or whatever. Do we need to make that public hearing piece decision, or can we just sort of say, like, we want this information to come back to council, sort of leave it to the mayor to decide whether that's a committee of the whole or whether we can do it quickly enough in a, not for a decision, but, you know, at a special regular meeting, that's the next update. And at that point, we decide on public hearing, public information, so on.
Ms. Glende is requesting, how much time do you?
Like 5 minutes. I just want to talk about schedules with staff.
We
if that's
will
possible.
recess until 4:35. Thanks for your patience, folks. The recess did go a little bit more than 5 minutes, but it was time well spent. Ms. Glenday, am I turning it over to you following the recess?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Council, for giving us that time. I just wanted to reconnect with the team around schedule and work volume. In terms of next steps and timing, the staff would go away and endeavor to get all of the work done required to bring this information back to Council. It's an aggressive amount of work, certainly. If Council wishes to have another committee of the whole to discuss and digest the information, followed by a public hearing, followed by decision, that will likely, just given schedule. So July is essentially full. We've only got 3 meetings left. August is a break. Now we're into September. There's UBCM. We're pushing this into October probably. Oh, actually, no, we're not, because October is all budget. So this would get pushed into November in terms of timing. So the application has been with the district since 2022. As much as we don't want the proponents' deadline to push your process, at the same time, there is a risk that if it goes to November, then all this work would be for naught. So we just leave that for Council in terms of decision, which is why we're saying deciding now around a public hearing is really quite helpful in terms of staff planning it and understanding the extent to which all this information needs to get to Council in advance of that public hearing. And here to answer more questions about that if you need more clarity.
Councillor Pettingill.
Is it wasted effort if we say, well, you know, if at the next committee of the whole, we decide we do want to proceed to a public hearing, is it wasted effort that or I guess that it might happen, we go to a committee of the whole and then decide, oh, we don't want a public hearing after all. It's just, it's not happening. Let's not waste everyone's time. Is that a wasted effort, or is there value in still sort of tentatively scheduling planning for a public hearing after the next committee of the whole sort of feedback?
Ms. Glenday.
I'm not quite sure what the question is. Actually, I'm sorry.
Well, I guess to my mind, like, I feel like as well, there's a lot of work to do. I want to understand and dig into that. There's a lot of stuff that I just went into superficially because a lot of information was missing. So I want that chance for not just Council, but the community to dig in. I think that's committee of the whole. And that's where then we can decide, to my mind, more specifically if a public hearing is warranted, or we just sort of say, we can just forget about the TUP unless the proponent is insisting we make a decision. And so is it useful in that context to make a public hearing decision today that, without knowing the outcome of that committee of the whole? Or do we risk wasting effort?
If I might, and again, I don't want to step into, what Council's hoping for a process, but in terms of staff, the plan was committee of the whole today, understand feedback that Council is looking for, collate the information, bring it back to Council for decision. Now we're hearing additional committee of the whole public hearing, which definitely extends the timeline, and that is Council's decision.
Councillor Hamilton, you have a motion?
Yeah, if there's no further questions on it, I'd like to propose a motion that we follow the staff suggested timeline that does not include a public hearing and allows staff to bring, now I'm too long for a motion. So the motion is that we follow staff's recommended timeline that does not include a public hearing.
Okay. Is there a seconder for this motion? Councillor Anderson is seconding the motion, and Councillor Hamilton, go ahead and speak to it.
So the piece of the public hearing that I think that I would like to have is where we hear directly from the public on their perspective in person on this subject. I find that extraordinarily valuable. The challenge with that is that we then get ourselves into a position where we can have no further input, no further comment on the subject, on the topic, and that puts us into a very difficult position with large projects. And so given the cost and I don't mean financial cost, given the negative impact of not hearing any further input after a particular moment versus hearing the verbal in-person input from the public, I think that we should, I would lean on the side of not hearing that input verbally, but have it in writing. I certainly want to hear from our community. I just think we're going to have to hear it in writing this time. Thanks.
Councillor Anderson is, thank you. And Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, I can't support this motion. I think, again, and I think we are, trying to do the best we could with the information we had and figuring out the best process. And I think, from my understanding and read of it, what we could have done better is had a second committee of the whole before the wood fiber public hearing. We had a large amount of new information at the public hearing. And that, I think, is the main thing that resulted in, the challenges. People had seen all this new information. We didn't make a decision tonight, and no one had a chance to really digest or speak to that new information. So I think that's the importance of having a committee of the whole next, so that council and the community understands all the information. We can have a week to all digest it, or a week or two, then go to the public hearing where there's not new information. We're all sort of digesting and speaking to what we've seen. And then, even if a decision can't be made the same night, we haven't just received a bunch of new information that people haven't digested and spoke about. So I think, again, the community interest on this project is so high and the engagement has been so lacking. I think a public hearing moderated by the district is critical. And I think, too, there's a lot of new information to come. So for me, the next piece is a committee of the whole. And where we go from there, I'm not sure. I don't have any sense that our staff have delayed this. I think we've been working all out, looking for more information from the proponent. As I've said, I think the proponent has created a lot of the delays and slow process by not responding to community concerns. And so our staff are left trying to put together all the pieces. And so, I appreciate the proponents' desperation to move forward, but they've said they have other viable approaches. And so I think we need to follow a good process for our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pettingill. Anybody else with comments? Mayor Herford.
Thank you. I think this is a really challenging piece. I think the hearing from the public is paramount, and I would like to see. My preference is for a public hearing that encompass both of these, but that's not something that's actually possible, given that they're two different applications, and we're talking about probably two different public hearings. I don't know if it's the same submissions on later that same night, or what that actually looks like as I contemplate how practical this is. So I was leaning towards having maybe choose one. Maybe the workforce accommodation feels to be the most maybe the more impactful one to the community, to the broader community, and use the other method for the laydown yard. I don't think that earlier in the conversation we did have we had some talk about the timelines and who's going to be in charge of ultimately the decision. So I would like to, if we're hearing that we need to make this decision in September, and given that where we are with things, I think that I also have the preference of going to public hearing with everything. And in other topics, I would push back quite hard on going to a public hearing with having new information delivered there. But in the spirit of wanting to be in charge of the timeline, I would lean towards a public. If that's sort of the pace that we're being pushed at by the proponent, then we go with new information there and live with that. So right now, I'm not supportive of this direction of no public hearings. I may have been swayed if we could compel the proponent to do a public information meeting on these pieces to get some of this information out and to form part of the package when we do get to decision. I'm hesitant. I contemplated making an amendment to this motion to reflect that. However, I'm not sure that we can do that. So that's a problem that I have here right now. So I always have enough information to say that it's not a path I want to pursue, but with that void, I'm not going to support this at this point.
Councillor Greenlaw.
I also won't be supporting the motion on the floor. I think that kind of echoing some of the comments that have been said by my colleagues, this is a very important project in our community, and there are a lot of opinions, and I think that I think we owe these people an opportunity to express them. Thanks.
All right. Unless there are any further comments, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Councillor Pettingill, Mayor Herford, and Councillor Greenlaw are opposed. The motion fails. Staff, does that give you the clarity that you need on the public hearing issue?
Through the chair, what we need is clarity on what council's expectation is around another committee of the whole, a public hearing or not, so that staff can plan accordingly.
Mayor Herford.
Thank you. So I've heard a lot about the timelines needed for construction and then implementation of the accommodation portion of this. Does the laydown yard run on the same timeline? Do they need the same 6 or 8 months of prep time to actually get operational, or do we have an understanding of that?
Thank you for the question. I know that the laydown yard still requires clearing. I'm not sure if it requires the same amount of lead time that's been discussed with regards to temporary workforce accommodation. So we need to get clarity on that. So I don't have an answer for you in terms of those timelines.
Yeah, thank you. I think maybe I'll test that we move forward with a public hearing for the workforce accommodation and use the staff recommendation on the for the matter of the laydown yard. That was a motion, by the way, Council. I look forward to your soliciting your support on this matter.
It's for clarity, Mayor Herford, and so that our minute taker can capture your motion, can you just walk us through that one more time?
That we proceed to public hearing for the workforce accommodation and then use the staff recommended approach for the laydown yard.
Would anybody like to second that motion? I will second it for discussion. You want to speak to it, Mayor Herford?
Yeah, I'll be brief. This is an attempt at building a bridge between the two perspectives we just had on the last vote, and I think that the workforce accommodation piece has the broader impact for the community as far as the land use goes and the issues around that we spoke to during the meeting. I think the laydown yard is far more focused on the impact is far more focused on the adjacent neighborhood, and for those reasons, I think I'm going a bit broader for the public input on the accommodation is appropriate, and it keeps things as streamlined as possible while still providing the public opportunity to provide feedback.
Councillor Pettingill.
Can I ask some clarity? There's no date on public hearing. Are we putting a date on it or just?
My motion did not contain a date.
So I'll speak to that. Then I think I'm not going to support this just because of our recent experience. I think that we've had so many questions today, which are entirely valid. I think the public, in regardless of whether we do one public hearing or two, I think we need to, both the community and council needs to see that information. And I think, as I understand, committee of the whole is the best place to do that. Just to even get it out to the public and have those conversations ahead of a public hearing so we can have an efficient public hearing. Otherwise, I see us down the same road, which doesn't help the proponent or council any. So I think, although it sounds like, oh, it's an extra meeting, it's actually the quickest path if we're going to stay on the path to a decision. And so for that reason, I think for me, again, even if it's just one public hearing, there needs to be a committee of the whole first to sort of hear about everything we've asked about today.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill. Other comments, council? Councillor Anderson.
This project has been with us for a decade. And in my view, we should have been working together with them to face the reality of the constraints on the available sites for such a workforce accommodation location. They're real. And Fortis has tried to do their best. We've also been involved to some extent, but I think that at this point in time, I'd like to be there as a cooperative partner to solve mutual problems. And I do not see that, I only see that we're going to create new ones with uncertainty, with them having to not being able to realize the plan of June 1st, 2025 for construction period. I think we're just inviting new problems. And I think that we need to realize that we have been part of this picture and maybe could have been a better part of this picture for a long time now in a better dialogue to solve common or issues that face all of us. So I'm not in support of a public hearing, to reiterate that. And I'm concerned about new problems arising with the outcomes that may be with the timeline issues.
Any other comments, council? Go ahead, Mayor Harford.
I just wanted to address a couple of things there. I think that in my time around this table, I've witnessed council and staff striving to work through challenges with the proponent and that's proponents on this overall project. So I understand that we all wish we were in a different place, but this is where we are today, and that's accumulation of actions, not exclusively around this table. I'll also say that I understand my colleagues' concern in not wanting to have a public hearing, and I hear that perspective. But we just had a vote on not having public hearings, and it failed. So I'm trying to find a path forward here where there's a mix. There isn't a resolution here where there's the no public hearings wasn't supported. So if this fails, I don't know where that leaves us. The next motion is 2 public hearings, I guess, if we're progressing from 0 to all of the available options. So I just wanted to make sure that we understood where we are, which was we just had a vote on public hearings, having no public hearings, and that vote failed. So I'm trying to find a path forward here. And but the no public hearing vote already happened.
I see your hand, Councillor Pettingill, and I'm just checking in with those who haven't spoken yet. Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
I could support a motion with a public hearing, ideally 2, but might even find my way to 1, as long as I understood there was a committee of the whole before the public hearing. I understand that's purposely excluded from this resolution, and if I'm wrong, I might consider. But again, for me, I think again it's a rush that slows us down without the committee of the whole piece. I'm not sure if my colleague would like to speak to that.
Go ahead.
I think that was a question to me. My motion doesn't preclude that, but doesn't explicitly say that. So if you wanted to propose an amendment, we'd entertain it.
All right. A quick look to my council colleagues to the right before I throw in my own comments. I think that this motion strikes the best possible balance at this point. And my biggest concern at this point is that the provincial government is watching this meeting, and there's a somewhat of a likelihood they're going to bring the hammer down like they've done before and just override us again. I'll be voting in favor of the motion. Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I just wanted to, in response to Mayor Herford's comments, I understand Mayor Herford's point of view as to where we're at in this conversation. I'm speaking in frustration. I would just like to see us expedite this as soon as possible without impractical delays with serious consequences for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Pettingill, and then Councillor Greenlaw. I want to wrap this up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just caution my colleagues. I feel strongly that it's not our place to imagine how the province may choose the rules and expectations of municipalities. We have a fairly clear, I think, set of expectations, and we have been executing them. If the province would like to change some of our rules or constraints, which it has the ability to do, it has a process by which to do that properly. And so they can do that if they feel it's necessary. But until that time, I think it's our job to follow what the Local Government Act and Community Charter says we are supposed to do, and not guess how the province might change that context. And so I think, you know, that's how we need to operate. Thank you.
Councillor Greenlaw.
I'll speak in favor of the motion.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed?
Excuse me. Could I ask that the motion be read?
Yes.
That council asks staff to move forward with a public hearing for the workforce accommodation and use the staff recommendation for the matter of the laydown yard.
You're clear, Councillor Anderson? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Councillor Anderson, Councillor Pettingill, and Councillor Hamilton opposed. The motion fails. Council, that still leaves staff needing direction on where we go from here. Anyone? Mayor Herford?
I saw us with three options here. We tried the first one, which was no public hearings. We tried one public hearing. So I don't think we need 2 public hearings on this matter. So yeah, I was contemplating actually making the motion and voting against it, but I'd rather hear from my colleagues, as I've taken an attempt at this already.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just stealing the opportunity. I think I've mostly said about the importance of a committee of the whole, but one other piece, I think if there is going to be a public hearing, I think we have to respect the communities, what I've heard from the community multiple times, and which we ourselves have shared with the EAO and so on, which is expectations around engagement during holidays and summer and so on. And so I think however we move forward, the ability of the community to fully participate in whatever happens next is critical. And I don't have a resolution to move forward, though.
Mayor Herford.
Is it possible to get clarity on our ability to compel the public information piece? This was an outstanding issue for me on the first vote. I don't know if we have that expertise in the building, or if this is refer this decision to this evening's meeting or something.
Well, staff contemplates that. Councillor Hamilton. Okay, it's a question for staff, so we'll go one question at a time, because that's logic. I'm hoping that staff is maybe contemplating some direction for us on this. Go ahead, Mr. Valenskis.
Thank you, Chair. Seeing that we have an issue with providing direction right now, Staff recommend to council as an option, an alternative, that if the applicant agrees to hold a public information meeting, then we bring this back with no hearing. And if we're not successful in that, then we hold a hearing as an option for council's consideration.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks for that suggestion. Question. Can we hold a town hall, which is not a public hearing, but allows people to voice their concerns or support of the project?
Through the chair.
Let me rephrase that. Of the temporary use permits, not the project.
I think through the chair, it will be the same as a hearing. It doesn't matter what we call it. If we're soliciting feedback in oral form, then it will act as the same.
Council? Councillor Penigo.
Well, we've tried a few things. I would propose that staff bring back the information requested today so council and community can consider at a committee of the whole, followed by a public hearing on the temporary worker camp. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay. Our minute taker left the room. Okay, thank you, Ms. Wells.
4 more minutes.
Are you clear on that motion? Okay. You're not on microphone, so
That staff bring back the requested information from today at a future committee of the whole, followed by a public hearing for the temporary workforce accommodation.
thank you. Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Greenlaw. You want to speak to it, Councillor Penigo?
Yeah, I've sort of already explained. I think, again, while people wish there was a one and done, there's a lot to digest. This is the quickest path to a fair decision that gives the community the ability to speak fairly with an unbiased facilitator. I think this is the quickest and fastest path forward, even if it's not everyone's favorite path.
Councillor Greenlaw, do you wish to speak?
I don't really have anything new to add. I think we should have a public hearing on this topic. I don't know how that happens, but I think we need to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Mayor Herford.
I propose an amendment that the language be added that there be a staff process, follow the staff's originally recommended process for the matter of the laydown yard. I need to look at this and I'll speak to it if there's a seconder.
I just want to check with Ms. Wells. Did you capture that one? Okay, very good.
Yes.
Councillor Penigo.
Would that the process for the laydown yard happen after the committee of the whole?
I suppose the intent here was that we address both matters together. So and that's why your motion that was silent on this particular topic was challenging for me. So if you want to amend your own or support my amendment that adds that clarity.
Yeah, I'm just, I would like to add the clarification that although one's a public hearing and one's a staff process, that both happen subsequent to the committee of the whole. I'm hoping I can have some assistance to make that more intelligible.
Well, the mayor has proposed an amendment that doesn't yet have a seconder. So I'm just not sure where you're trying to go with this, Councillor Penigo.
Okay. So I will second the mayor's amendment.
Okay, very good. Mayor Herford.
Thank you. I just think this was needed clarity in the process to look at both of these together so that we're not because they're so intertwined. So happy to support. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none.
Sorry, just so I'm clear, are we accepting Councillor Pettingill's as a friendly amendment to Mayor Herford's amendment?
No, we are not.
Okay.
I'm going to call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. The amendment passes. Now, comments on the original motion as amended, if there are any. Councillor Hamilton, followed by Mayor Herford.
Could we have the minute taker please let us know what the motion is as amended? I'd like to be very clear on it. Thanks.
Testing me. The motion as I have it is that staff bring back the information requested by the Committee of the Whole at today's date, followed by a public hearing for the temporary workforce accommodation. And that and that council follows staff's recommended process for the laydown yard. And I will make it a little more eloquent for the minute.
Mayor Herford?
Yeah, I think that gives. I think that's as intended.
Did I see your hand, Councillor Pettingill?
You just want to make sure that the information come back to a committee of the whole, not just from the committee of the whole.
Yeah, I believe that that's captured. Yes. Councillor.
Okay. Can I ask for staff clarification? I think, as the mayor's spoken to, we're looking for an efficient way to treat these both together. So can we assume that while there won't be a public hearing for both, that we will consider both subsequent to the committee of the whole? That brings back all the information we've asked for.
If that is the intent of the motion, we can do that.
Okay. My last check-in for comments before I call the question. Councillor Hamilton.
I'm very concerned that we're going down a very convoluted path where we're treating these two related temporary use permits in very different ways that are going to come on very different timelines. I think that we have an onus there. We have a responsibility to make timely decisions, independent of whether or not the proponent is able to answer all of our questions in a reasonable timeline. We have a responsibility to make a decision on a reasonable timeline. And I am concerned that we are putting ourselves into a situation where we'll be unable to do that. So I will not be supporting this motion.
Councillor Pettingill.
So for clarity, I think the intent is actually to expedite this and make it as clear as possible. The idea would be we'd have the committee of the whole, get all the answers for council and the public. We have a public hearing about the public works yard. Following that, there will be a decision on the public works yard and also a decision on the laydown yard. And people inevitably will speak to both at the public hearing, and we will also have had in the intervening time between the committee of the whole and the public hearing lots of opportunity to hear from the public on both. And so we'll be in a good position even with one public hearing, even though one is formally part of a public hearing, we'll be in a good position to weigh in on both topics.
And just for clarity, you meant worker accommodation, not public works building. I'm sure there's the
Yes,
public
thank you.
hearing, public, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
All right. I got to call the question. All those in favor of the motion as amended? And opposed? Councillor Hamilton and Councillor Anderson oppose. The motion passes. Mayor Herford.
I was going to offer a motion to terminate this meeting.
Wow, you are fast out of the gate with that. Seconded by Councillor Hamilton. Oh, I'm going to give it to Councillor. I didn't see it. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous. We're back here at 6 o'clock for the regular meeting. Thank you, folks.